Hello beautiful people, welcome to Wizardium. In today's episode we explore what if the founders combined magic chose Harry and Hermione. Hit like, subscribe and join our community of story lovers. Let's begin. Chapter 1, the night two names were written. The magic came apart at 11:04 p.m. on Halloween night 1981. Not slowly, not with warning, not the way magic usually unravels, fraying at the edges like old cloth, giving you time to notice, time to worry. It came apart the way a mirror shatters, one instant whole, the next instant nothing but fragments and the ghost of your own reflection flying in every direction at once. In Godric's Hollow, in a house that was still smoking at its corners, a dark-robed figure stood over a cradle and spoke words that had never failed him. Had never failed anyone, because no one who heard them lived long enough to report the experience. The killing curse left his wand in a blaze of sickly green light, struck the child in the cradle square in the forehead, and then, for the first and only time in recorded magical history, came back. The rebound didn't just destroy the caster's body. It tore something in the fabric of the magical world itself, a wound in the substrate beneath all magic, beneath wands and spells and the careful human architecture wizards had spent centuries constructing on top of something ancient and enormous, and not remotely concerned with human ambition. The wound went deep. It went all the way down to where the founders' magic still lived. Most wizards understood Hogwarts as a school. Some of the better-read ones understood it as a magical construction of extraordinary complexity. A handful of scholars working in obscure corners of the Department of Mysteries suspected it was something older than the word school could contain, a working, a covenant, a living magical entity that had been tended and shaped over 1,000 years, but had its own purposes, its own continuity, its own slow and vast intelligence. Godric Gryffindor had been the one to propose it first, sitting in a candlelit room in what would eventually become the headmaster's office, arguing with three people he admired and fought with in roughly equal measure. What if the school outlives us, he'd said, what if it has to? Rowena Ravenclaw had pointed out, with the particular precision that made her simultaneously invaluable and exhausting to argue with, that buildings did not inherently possess survival instincts, and that his metaphor required significant structural unpacking before it could be considered an actual proposal. Helga Hufflepuff had made tea and said nothing for a long time and then said, "He's not talking about the building." Salazar Slytherin had been quiet longest of all. He'd stood at the window looking out over the loch, and eventually he'd said, "If we pour enough of ourselves into this place, enough intention, enough magic, enough, then yes, I think it could survive us. I think it could know when the time came what needed doing." Is that wise? Rowena had asked. Probably not, Salazar had said, and he'd almost smiled. But then wisdom has never been Godric's primary concern. Adventure, Godric had said cheerfully, adventure is my primary concern. They had argued for 3 more hours, and then they had done it anyway because for all their differences, they had one thing in common that overrode every philosophical objection. They loved what they'd built, and the idea of it ending was unbearable. The magic they wove that night was a last resort, an insurance policy against extinction. A thread connecting the school to the bloodlines, to the elemental forces, to the future in ways that none of them could fully articulate but all of them could feel, vibrating through their chests like a second heartbeat. It had never activated, not during the persecution of Muggle-born students in the 1300s, not during the Statute of Secrecy upheavals in 1692, not during Grindelwald's War. But at 11:04 p.m. on Halloween 1981, when a hole was torn in the world's magical substrate and something ancient and wounded came screaming down through it looking for somewhere to go, the founders' magic woke up for the first time in 1,000 years, looked at what was happening and made a decision. Not one vessel, two, because one would not be enough, and the founders, even Salazar in the end, had never been ones to do things by halves. In the ruins of a house in Godric's Hollow, a 15-month-old boy stopped screaming and went very, very still. The magic settled into him like heat into cold stone, slowly, thoroughly, finding every crack and corner. He didn't understand it. He was 15 months old. He didn't understand anything yet, not in the way that could be put into words. But he felt the 4 distinct presences moving through him, one bright and roaring, one warm and steady, one precise and crystalline, one cold and deep, and something in his infant chest recognized all of them and leaned toward them the way a plant leans toward light. The lightning bolt scar on his forehead stopped bleeding. His green eyes, already unusually bright, settled into something that would confuse people for years, not just green but the green of deep water and old growth and something that had no comfortable English name. He slept. 40 miles away in a comfortable house on the outskirts of Oxford, a 2-year-old girl with an absurd quantity of brown hair and very serious brown eyes sat bolt upright in her cot at 11:04 p.m. on Halloween night and opened her mouth and screamed. Her parents came running. Her father got there first, a tall man named Richard who was a dentist by trade and a warrior by nature, and he gathered his daughter up and held her and said, "SHH, SHH, it's all right," in the automatic way parents do when they aren't at all sure it's all right. Hermione Granger screamed for exactly 4 seconds and then she stopped. She looked at her father with eyes that seemed, in the dim glow of the hallway nightlight, slightly too knowing for a 2-year-old. Her father would remember this moment for years and never quite find the words for what had unsettled him about it. She just looked at him, the way she sometimes looked at the pictures in her books, like she was taking inventory, like she was filing the information away. Then she'd said very clearly, for a 2-year-old, "Oh," and she'd gone back to sleep. Her mother stood in the doorway, hand pressed to her chest. "What was that about?" "No idea," her father said, "but she's fine." She was fine. She was also, from that moment forward, different in ways that would take years to fully understand. Reading at 2, logic puzzles at 3, a peculiar intuition about systems and patterns and the invisible architecture beneath things that her parents chalked up to exceptional intelligence, and her teachers chalked up to exceptional intelligence, and Hermione herself, when she was old enough to notice it, simply thought of as how she thought. She didn't know she'd been chosen. She didn't know about magic, or Hogwarts, or Founders, or Halloween 1981. She just grew up knowing in her bones that the world had more structure than people could see, and that she could see more of it than most. 9 years passed. They passed the way years do when they're happening to someone who doesn't know they're important, in flashes, in fragments, in the accumulated weight of ordinary days that only gain their significance in retrospect. For Harry Potter, those 9 years happened in a cupboard under the stairs, in the passenger seat of a car he wasn't allowed to touch, in kitchens that smelled of other people's breakfasts, in schoolyards where strange things happened around him that he couldn't explain and had learned not to mention. He was small for his age, Harry. Skinny in the way of a child who eats adequately but not abundantly, with knobby knees and hair that couldn't decide what direction it wanted to go, and glasses held together at the bridge with sellotape. He had his mother's eyes, though he didn't know that. He had his father's cheekbones, though he didn't know that either. What he had that was purely his own, that hadn't come from anyone, that had been his since birth, was a quality his Aunt Petunia called insolence and his teachers called unusual self-possession for a boy his age, and Dudley Dursley called, with the authentic linguistic creativity of the very dim, that look like he knows something you don't, which was, of all of them, closest to accurate. Harry Potter had always known things he had no way of knowing. Not facts exactly, he couldn't have told you historical dates or the names of elements or the capital of Mozambique without looking them up. But he knew situations. He knew when adults were lying to him. He knew when danger was coming before it arrived. He knew somehow when magic was near. He'd assumed for most of his life that everyone knew these things and simply didn't mention them. He was 10 when Quirinus Quirrell walked past him on a street in London, and Harry felt something cold and wrong brush against the inside of his skull, not pain exactly, more like the feeling of touching something rotten in the dark, and stepped sideways out of the man's path before he'd consciously registered the decision to move. Quirrell had turned and looked at him. Harry had looked back. "Do you know me?" Quirrell had asked. He had a stutter, mild but present, and his eyes were a strange flat grey. "No," Harry had said, but he'd remembered the feeling, filed it away with careful precision in the part of his mind where he kept the things that mattered. Hermione Granger's letter arrived first. July 19th, 1991, a Tuesday, before her parents were awake. She'd been up since 5, reading at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she'd made herself, perfectly, because she'd been making it perfectly since she was 7, and the owl had arrived at the window with the kind of confident authority that suggested it had never once considered the possibility of being unwelcome. She'd taken the letter. She'd opened it. She'd read it 3 times in quick succession, each pass faster than the last, the way she read things when she was excited and trying to also be careful about being excited. Then she'd sat very still for a moment, looking at the Hogwarts crest embossed at the top of the letter, and something in her chest had done a thing it had never quite done before. Not surprise, because this didn't feel like surprise. It felt like recognition. Like finding a word in a foreign language for something she'd always felt but never been able to name. She'd put the kettle on for her parents and waited, very calmly, and when they came downstairs she'd slid the letter across the table and said, "So, about that." They'd needed convincing, naturally. Her parents were sensible, methodical people who believed in evidence and process and the scientific method, and a letter from a school for witches and wizards ran counter to all of those commitments at a fairly foundational level. But Hermione had been collecting evidence since she was 7, a list, in a small notebook with a purple cover, of things that happened around her that couldn't be otherwise explained, and she presented it to them with the calm authority of someone who has already done all the worrying and come out the other side. By the time Professor McGonagall arrived to confirm the school's existence with a brisk demonstration that left a teacup spending several disorienting seconds as a tortoise, her parents had moved from deeply skeptical to cautiously convinced to somewhat excited, in that order. Hermione had already started writing her school supply list. Harry's letter arrived on a Friday. It arrived in the mail slot, which was unusual enough, but he'd known something was coming, had felt it building for days, a kind of pleasant pressure behind his sternum like the air before a thunderstorm. He'd been awake when the flap opened at 6 in the morning, had watched the letter slide through and land on the mat, and had crossed the hallway in his socks and picked it up before his uncle's alarm went off. He'd stood in the hallway in the blue pre-dawn light and read it. Then he'd folded it neatly, put it in the back pocket of his jeans, gone to his cupboard and started thinking. He'd known about magic his whole life, not the word exactly, not the framework, but the fact of it. He'd known things bent around him sometimes. He'd known that the glass front of the boa constrictor's tank at the zoo had gone away because he'd wanted it to. He'd known in the quiet place behind his eyes where the 4 distinct voices sometimes spoke to him in ways that weren't quite hearing, that there was a world he was meant for that wasn't the Dursleys' kitchen. He hadn't known it was called Hogwarts. He'd thought about telling his aunt and uncle, and then he'd thought about it more carefully, and then he'd decided against it on the practical grounds that it would go badly. He was right. When his uncle found the second letter, which had arrived the next morning, addressed to Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs in a manner suggesting whoever had written it disapproved of the situation, things went badly. They went badly for 4 days, during which time letters kept arriving in increasing quantities, and his uncle kept intercepting them with increasing desperation. And Harry watched this escalation with the detached tactical interest of someone who has correctly predicted the sequence of events and is simply waiting for it to reach its natural conclusion. The natural conclusion was a large man with a bushy black beard and an umbrella that sparked at the tip appearing through the window of a shack on a rock in the middle of the sea and saying very simply, "Harry, you're a wizard." "I know," Harry said. Hagrid blinked. "You what?" "I know," Harry said again and smiled, a real one, unguarded in a way his smiles rarely were. "I've been waiting for someone to come and explain it properly." Platform 9 3/4 was chaos, which Harry navigated by standing slightly to the side of it and watching the patterns. He'd found over the years that most chaotic situations had patterns if you stood at the right angle. A red-haired family of enormous vertical extent consumed a significant portion of the platform, all of them moving at different speeds and talking over each other in the comfortable way of people who have always had others to talk over them. An older blonde boy Harry had briefly crossed paths with in Diagon Alley, Malfoy, he remembered, Draco Malfoy, the one who'd said Muggle-borns shouldn't bother in a voice carefully calibrated to sound casual, was being fussed over by a woman who wore her contempt for the surrounding platform like a second set of robes. Harry had a trolley and a trunk and an owl in a cage that Hagrid had given him, Hedwig, white and imperious, and currently regarding the platform with the expression of someone who has very high standards and is finding them comprehensively unmet. He had the ticket in his front pocket. He had 11 years of waiting behind him. He pushed his trolley at the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 at a brisk walk, not a run, because he'd been told the running was optional, and he preferred not to look as though he needed the momentum to commit, and the barrier dissolved around him without fuss. The Hogwarts Express was red and enormous and smelled of coal smoke, and something beneath that, something older, something that had nothing to do with the mechanics of steam engines, and Harry stood on the platform for a moment and breathed it in, and felt the 4-part harmony in his chest settle into something that might, if he'd had a word for it, be called homecoming. He found a compartment near the back of the train, stowed his trunk, settled Hedwig's cage on the overhead rack, and had approximately 8 minutes of quiet before the compartment door slid open and a girl stood there who was, Harry immediately thought, extremely serious-looking, even for someone standing in a train doorway carrying a very large book. She was about his height, bushy-haired, and in possession of eyes that were doing to him what she probably didn't realize, which was the same inventory-taking, filing-away thing he did to people and situations, except she was doing it slightly faster. "Are there free seats?" she asked. "Clearly," Harry said, because there were 4 empty seats. She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh but was adjacent to one and came in and sat down across from him and opened her book. Back to looking out the window. They were like that for a while, comfortable in a way that 2 people who have never met shouldn't quite be, the silence easy rather than awkward, and then she looked up from her book and said without preamble, "Something's different about you." Harry turned from the window. "Something's different about you too." She studied him for a moment. "How long have you known about magic?" "My whole life." "You..." "July," she paused. "Though I think I've always known in a way. I just didn't have the vocabulary for it." Another pause. "Hermione Granger." "Harry Potter." She blinked, not the wide-eyed, slack-jawed blink that his name typically produced in wizarding people, but something more careful, more considered, like she was moving puzzle pieces. "The Harry Potter? I assume so. I've only met the one." "Right." She looked back at her book. "I read about you in A History of Magic and in The Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts. You destroyed Voldemort when you were 15 months old." She said the name without flinching, which Harry noted with approval. "Except that can't be the whole story, can it? A 15-month-old child can't defeat a Dark Lord through any mechanism that's been adequately explained in the literature." "No," Harry said. "I've been thinking about that too. What do you think happened?" It was the first time anyone had asked him that. Hagrid had given him information. The Dursleys had given him silence. The magical world, from what he'd seen of Diagon Alley, seemed to have settled comfortably into a narrative about the boy who lived without particularly worrying about the mechanism. But this girl, Hermione, had asked him what he thought. "I think something else was involved," he said. "Something older than Voldemort, something that used what happened to do something the original participants hadn't planned for." She stared at him. "That is," she said slowly, "also what I think, approximately. My version involves more specific hypotheses about the magical substrate beneath." She stopped, started again. "I have a notebook. I'd like to see it." She went slightly pink. "It's not, it's just thinking, it's not organized, I'd still like to see it." She pulled out the notebook, purple cover, small, clearly well used, and handed it across. He opened it to a random page. Her handwriting was small and precise, and the ideas were the right ideas, he thought. Not complete, not finalized, but the shape of the thinking was correct, and he knew it the way he knew things he had no way of knowing. "This is good," he said. "Obviously," Hermione said, and then seemed surprised at herself. "Sorry, I'm working on that." "Don't be sorry, you're right." He handed the notebook back. "I think we've been thinking about the same problem from different directions." She tucked the notebook away. Outside, the countryside had started to move past, London falling behind them, green opening up ahead. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect? The books make you sound quite passive, as though things happened to you." "Things have happened to me," Harry said. "Doesn't mean I wasn't paying attention." She smiled at that, a real one, not the polished thing she'd walked in wearing, but something with warmth in it. "No, I suppose not." She looked out the window and then back at him. "Do you feel it?" He understood immediately what she meant. The four-part harmony, the presence beneath the presence, the thing that had lived in his chest since he was 15 months old and had been quiet for so long he'd half convinced himself it was just how thinking felt. "Every day," he said. "Me too." She was very still for a moment. "I've never told anyone that before." "Neither have I." The train moved through a tunnel, and the compartment went briefly dark. And when the light came back, they were both looking out the window, and the silence had changed into something neither of them would have quite been able to explain, a quiet that wasn't empty, that was full of something taking root. The sorting was, for most of the first-year students, a ritual that combined the nervousness of a performance with the strange vulnerability of being judged by something ancient and impartial. For most of them, the hat took 30 seconds to a minute, said a name, and the question was settled. It took the hat 4 minutes to sort Hermione Granger. She sat on the stool with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap and her face wearing an expression of polite composure that was doing significant heavy lifting, because inside her head the sorting hat was not saying Gryffindor and moving on. It was talking. Well, it said, in a voice like old paper and older stone. Well, when was the last time I felt this?" "I'm not sure what you mean." Hermione thought back carefully because the hat had said you could think at it, and she believed in using the available tools. "No, I don't imagine you do. You're 11. There was something in its tone that was not condescending but was deeply, thoroughly impressed, which was more disconcerting. "You know what lives in you, girl. Something old," she thought. "Something with 4 parts. Something that's been there since I was 2. Something with 4 parts. The hat was quiet for a moment in a way that didn't feel like deliberation but more like genuine wonder. "I made those 4. I've carried them since before your grandmothers were born. And now I find them here in a child, in 2 children." Another pause. "This is unprecedented." "What does it mean?" "It means," the hat said, "that the world is in far worse trouble than anyone currently understands, and that 2 children on this planet have been asked to carry a weight that would break most adults. It means you are Gryffindor because that's where your courage lives, and courage is what you'll need most. But listen to me, child, and listen carefully." She was listening. "The boy in this hall, you already know which one. He carries the other half of what you carry. You are 2 parts of the same answer. Do not try to be each other. Do not try to carry this alone. And do not," the hat added, with a sudden sharp edge that surprised her, "let anyone convince you that what lives in you is theirs to direct." Then, aloud in the voice that filled the great hall, "Gryffindor." She walked to the Gryffindor table on legs that were steadier than they had any right to be, sat down, accepted the congratulations of people whose names she was going to learn immediately, and did not let any of it show on her face. When Harry's name was called, and the murmur that ran through the hall at Potter was like a wave, a physical thing, breaking and receding, she watched him walk to the stool with that particular quality he had of being completely unbothered by the attention. He sat down. The hat came over his eyes. It took 3 minutes. She couldn't hear what the hat was saying to him, obviously, but she watched his face beneath the hat's brim, and she could see the slight changes, the small furrow of concentration, the moment of what might be argument, the brief sharp thing that crossed his expression when the hat said something he didn't expect. And then, at the very end, just before the hat called out Gryffindor, she saw something settle in him, some decision being made or accepted, and his shoulders dropped a fraction as though a tension she hadn't noticed had released. He came to the Gryffindor table and sat down 2 seats from her, and the feast started, and she leaned over and said quietly under the noise of the hall, "What did it say to you?" He looked at her sidelong. "Things I need to think about. You." "Same." She picked up her fork. "Did it tell you about the other one?" "The 2 of you it mentioned." His gaze sharpened. "It mentioned the other half to me too, differently, but..." He glanced at her with those unsettling green eyes. "I'd already worked out who it meant." "On the train," she said. "On the train," he agreed. Around them, the Gryffindor table was in full celebration, food appearing, people talking, Percy Weasley making announcements that no one was listening to, Ron Weasley trying to simultaneously eat and tell Harry about Quidditch. Harry engaged with all of it, easy and present, asking questions and making people feel heard in a way that was so natural it almost hid how much attention he was actually paying to everything. She watched him do it and thought, he's done this his whole life, been present in rooms that didn't deserve his presence. She thought about what the hat had told her. Do not let anyone convince you that what lives in you is theirs to direct. She looked up the Gryffindor table to where Dumbledore sat at the high table, long white beard and half-moon glasses and an expression of serene benevolence that she had already, in 3 minutes of observation, decided warranted further examination. He was looking at Harry, and then, almost as though he'd felt her gaze, he looked at her. She met his eyes without flinching and went back to her dinner. The first week was about learning the shape of the place. Hogwarts was, and there was no better word for it, even though she was deeply skeptical of imprecise vocabulary, alive. She'd known this the moment she walked through the doors, the same knowing she'd had for as long as she could remember, but stronger here. The castle breathed. The magic in the walls was old enough and layered enough to have its own presence, its own texture, and when she rested her hand against a stone corridor on the second day, she felt the faint pulse of something beneath her palm that wasn't temperature or vibration but was something between those things. Oh, she'd thought, the same word she'd said at 2 years old and taken her hand away and made a note in her notebook. Charms was extraordinary. Transfiguration was extraordinary. Potions was taught by a man named Severus Snape who had opinions about Gryffindors that he aired in the first 5 minutes of the first lesson, and who was, despite his introduction being what could most charitably be called hostile, one of the most genuinely brilliant people she'd encountered. She noted that separately and filed it under complicated. History of magic was delivered by a ghost, which was inefficient. Defense against the dark arts was taught by Quirinus Quirrell, who stuttered and wore a turban and smelled, inexplicably, of garlic and something beneath garlic that Hermione couldn't identify and didn't like. She'd noticed the smell in the corridor outside the classroom before she went in, and she'd stopped walking and stood there for a moment with the Founder's magic very quiet in her chest, quiet in the particular way that meant it was paying close attention. Harry materialized beside her. "You feel it too," she said. "Since Diagon Alley," he said. "That's where I first crossed paths with him, Nocturne Alley." He was watching Quirrell's classroom door with an expression that was calm on the surface and something else entirely underneath. "The feeling isn't him, it's something in him, something that shouldn't be there. Two presences where there should be one," she said slowly, working it out as she said it. "Like a room with two fires, you'd notice the heat was wrong. Exactly like that." He glanced at her. "I haven't said anything to anyone yet. I want to understand it better before I say it to someone who might not listen." "Agreed," she said. "We need more information." She paused. "Also, Professor Dumbledore knows something is wrong with him. He's been watching Quirrell since the feast." Harry considered this. "Then why hasn't he done anything?" "Because he's waiting. He wants to know what Quirrell is for." A long pause. "That's cold," Harry said. "Yes," Hermione said, and she didn't say, "But it's probably the right strategy," because she wasn't sure it was, and she didn't say things she wasn't sure of. "We should get to class." "We should," Harry agreed, and they went in, and Quirrell flinched when they walked through the door, just slightly, just for a fraction of a second, barely visible, and Harry and Hermione both noticed it and said nothing. By the end of the first week, Harry had been to the Quidditch pitch, argued Neville out of what was shaping up to be a minor crisis about his remembrall, and had his wand confiscated for 12 minutes by Professor Flitwick before being given it back with a comment about the charm work being quite extraordinary for an untrained student. Ron Weasley had decided, in the somewhat impulsive way he decided most things, that Harry was his best friend. Harry had decided, in the more careful way he decided most things, that Ron was genuine and funny and worth knowing, which wasn't quite the same thing but was a solid beginning. Hermione had memorized the locations of all the classrooms, catalogued the Hogwarts Library's cataloging system, and found 3 significant flaws in it, identified which of the moving staircases were predictable versus genuinely random, and had a working hypothesis about which sections of the castle's magic dated from original founder construction versus later additions. On Saturday she spread her notes across a table in the back corner of the library, and Harry arrived with a plate of toast from breakfast and sat across from her and said, "Show me what you've got." She showed him. He went through it systematically, not the way people usually went through her notes, which was either skimming politely or getting overwhelmed and giving up, but actually reading, actually thinking, his finger tracing diagrams she'd drawn of the magical architecture. "This corridor here," he said, pointing. "Third floor, the one that's locked. There's something in there," she said. "I've been past it twice and the magic inside is layered. Recent layers on top of old ones. Something's been added this year." Harry nodded slowly. "Quirrell knows about it. Whatever's in there, he wants it. And Dumbledore knows he wants it, which is why the thing is here rather than somewhere better guarded." She paused. "We should know what's in there before any of the relevant parties make a move." Harry looked at her. "The corridor is locked with several enchantments." "I know," she said. "I can get through 4 of them. The 5th one I haven't worked out yet." "There's a dog," he said. She blinked. "How do you know?" "I can hear it from the stairwell. 3 distinct breathing patterns, occasional sound of movement." He paused. "Very large dog, more than one head, I think." She stared at him for a moment. "You can hear a dog through a stone door from 30 feet away. The Founder's magic does things to perception sometimes," he said with the ease of someone who has had 11 years to get comfortable with impossible things. "I've been trying to catalogue what." "Right." She pulled out her purple notebook and started writing. "Right, obviously, what else?" "Better depth perception in low light. Ability to sense magical resonance in nearby objects. Occasional, not prescience exactly, more like pattern recognition, so fast it feels like knowing something before it happens." He tilted his head. "You, reading speed and retention, that's I've tested it. I can read and retain at approximately 4 times the rate I was reading at a year ago, and it's still accelerating. I can see magical structure in spells the way you might see the grammar of a sentence. I understand things about magical theory intuitively that the books treat as advanced material." She tapped her pen against the notebook. "And I can feel the castle when I touch the walls, its history, its attention. It's like," she searched for the right comparison, "it's like standing in a room with someone you know very well. You don't have to look at them to know where they are." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Godric's instincts," he said. "In me, Rowena's architecture, in you. Hufflepuff's what? Warmth, steadiness." "Both," he said. "And Slytherin's ambition," she said. "But the original version, before it got complicated." "Before it got complicated," he agreed. He reached for a piece of toast. "We have, at current count, a suspicious professor, a locked corridor with a large multi-headed dog, a headmaster who is almost certainly several moves ahead of everyone and may or may not have our interests in mind, and a whole year ahead of us to work it out." "And homework," Hermione said. "Lots of homework," Harry agreed gravely. "Potions, essay, charms, reading, and transfiguration practice for next week." Transfiguration practice is not a problem. He'd already transfigured his quill into a fork and back twice this week without entirely meaning to. "Show off," she said, but she was smiling. "You said it first," he pointed out, and she laughed. A real one, the kind she didn't manage often. And the library was warm and smelled of old paper, and outside the windows the Scottish Highlands were enormous and grey and magnificent. And Harry Potter and Hermione Granger sat in the back corner and planned and argued and went quiet together over their notes. And the Founder's magic hummed between them like a frequency, like a tuning fork struck long ago and still sounding. It was 3 in the morning on the Wednesday of the second week when Hermione woke up, already reaching for her wand, with a feeling like cold water poured down the back of her neck. She sat up in her dormitory bed, heart going quickly, and listened. Nothing in the dormitory. Lavender Brown and Parvati Patil breathing steadily. Neville's cat, Trevor, creaking his tank in the corner. The feeling didn't come from inside the dormitory. She was down the stairs in 30 seconds, wrapped in her dressing gown, wand lit. The common room was empty except for the dying fire. She crossed to the portrait hole, and then the fat lady said, quite crossly, "Out at this hour, really? There's something wrong," Hermione said. "Not in here, out there." A long pause. The fat lady looked at her carefully. "3rd floor," she said finally, and opened. Harry was in the corridor outside, also in a dressing gown, also already heading for the stairs. He saw her and stopped for approximately half a second. "3rd floor," he said. "3rd floor," she confirmed. They went up. The castle shifted around them deliberately, she thought, roots shortening themselves, the magic paying attention, and they reached the 3rd floor corridor in 2 minutes instead of 5. The door was open, not forced open. The enchantments had been removed, carefully, methodically, by someone who knew what they were doing. Inside, something was wrong with the pattern of the air in the way that meant something had been here and left, or something had been disturbed and settled back. Harry stepped through first, wand up. She was a half step behind him, and she was running the magical residue of what was in the room through everything she knew, feeling it the way you'd feel a texture with your fingers. The dog, 3 heads, enormous, currently asleep for reasons that she identified as enchanted harp music from a small golden instrument winding down on the floor, lay in front of a trapdoor. The trapdoor was still closed. Someone had gotten this far and been interrupted before they could go further. Harry crouched and looked at the trapdoor. They didn't get through. No, she was still reading the magical residue. The intrusion happened very recently, within the last 30 minutes. They opened the outer enchantments, got to the dog, put it to sleep, approached the trapdoor, and then she tracked the movement in the room. Left quickly as though they heard something. She paused, or felt something. Harry stood and looked at her. In the low light, his eyes were the green of deep water. "We're here because the castle called us." "I think so," she said. "I think it's been watching this all along, and tonight it decided we needed to see it." "Why tonight?" "Something changed. Whoever it was is getting bolder," she said. "The pace is accelerating." She looked at the trapdoor. "Whatever's under there, the timeline has shortened." He was quiet for a moment. "We should go down." "Not tonight," she said. "We're not prepared. We need to know what's down there before we go down there, and we need to gather that information systematically." She paused. "Also, the dog is waking up." They both heard it simultaneously, the shift in breathing from all 3 heads, the first stirring of enormous paws against the stone floor, and they were out of the room and down the corridor and around the corner before the first head fully lifted, moving fast and completely silent, and Harry pulled the door shut with wandless magic from 15 feet away without breaking stride. They stopped in an alcove and listened to the castle settle around them. You could have let me do that, she said, slightly breathless. Could I? He said. Yes, I had a locking charm ready. I was closer, by approximately 2 feet. It's a meaningful 2 feet when a three-headed dog is involved. She opened her mouth and then closed it and said, Fine, all right, we need to go back. We need to start in the library tomorrow, he said. I want to know what enchantments typically protect something of that significance. If we can identify the categories of protection, we can extrapolate what's worth protecting. I've already started a list, she said. Of course she had. They went back through the castle, which delivered them to Gryffindor Tower in approximately 90 seconds via a route that should not have existed, and at the portrait hole they stopped, and Harry said, Hermione. She turned. I'm glad the hat put us in the same house, he said. It was simple and direct, and she could tell it had taken nothing out of him to say it, which was simultaneously the most uncomplicated thing she'd heard from a person their age and somehow the most significant. Me too, she said, and she meant it the way you mean things that are only starting to be true, not completely yet, but on their way. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and listened to the castle breathing. The Founder's magic was steady in her chest, all 4 parts of it, and tonight it felt almost satisfied, the way a good teacher's magic would feel, she thought, watching students finally start asking the right questions. She smiled at the ceiling and closed her eyes. Outside the window, the Scottish sky was beginning its slow transition from deep black to the first grey-blue suggestion of dawn. Somewhere in the castle, Professor Dumbledore was sitting at his desk looking at a silver instrument that had been behaving unusually for the past 3 hours, making measurements he hadn't expected to make for years yet. Professor McGonagall knocked and entered without waiting. You saw the disturbance? I did. The children as well. The children, Dumbledore said, looking at the instrument, were in that corridor approximately 7 minutes after Quirrell left it. They examined the scene with a thoroughness that I found, he paused, both deeply impressive and somewhat alarming. They're 11 years old, Albus. 11 years old, he agreed. Yes, he looked at the instrument again. Minerva, I've been operating under certain assumptions about how this year would proceed. I think I need to revise them. McGonagall looked at him carefully. You're worried? I'm no. He settled back. Not worried. Reassessing. There is a meaningful distinction. McGonagall looked at him a moment longer, in the way she had of looking at him when she thought the distinction he was drawing was less meaningful than he believed. Then she said, Miss Granger had a locking charm ready, apparently. Potter sealed the door wondrously from 15 feet while at a full run. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. How do you know that? The castle told me, McGonagall said with the straightforwardness of someone who has been at Hogwarts long enough to accept its confidences as a matter of course. In its way, another silence. Keep an eye on them, Dumbledore said finally, carefully, without interference. McGonagall looked at him one more time and then left, and Dumbledore sat in the quiet of his office and looked at his instruments and thought about 11-year-old children who woke at 3 in the morning to answer Castle's call and examined crime scenes with the thoroughness of trained investigators and knew already that the world was not what they'd been told. He thought about this for a long time. Then he went back to his chess game and moved a pawn. Chapter 2, The Weight of 4. The library opened at 7 in the morning, and Hermione was there at 7 in the morning, which was not a coincidence. Harry arrived at 7:14 with 2 cups of tea from the kitchens. He discovered the kitchens on day 4, via a route that Hermione was fairly certain shouldn't exist, and Harry seemed to consider entirely natural, and set one down beside her without interrupting what she was doing, which was cross-referencing 3 books simultaneously with the focused energy of someone who has been awake for 2 hours already, and considers this a perfectly reasonable start to a Thursday. She looked up long enough to say thank you, looked back down and then looked up again. You went to the kitchens. The castle showed me, he said, settling into the chair across from her. The castle showed you the kitchens. It shows me things sometimes, routes, rooms, doors that weren't there the day before. He picked up his tea. I think it likes me. It's a building, Harry. It's a building that woke us up at 3 in the morning to examine a crime scene, he said mildly. She opened her mouth and closed it. Fair point. He looked at the book spread between them. What have we got? She turned her notebook so he could see it. So, the corridor protection, a 3-headed dog, is on its own unusual enough to suggest this isn't a standard storage situation. From there, she tapped a diagram she'd drawn. The magical residue in the room suggests at minimum 3 additional enchantment layers below the trapdoor, based on what I could read from the surface. Quirrell got through the outer door enchantments and the dog, which means he has significant skill or significant help or both. He didn't get to the trapdoor itself, because something stopped him. Possibly a timer on the dog's enchanted sleep. There was a harp winding down. Possibly he was disturbed before the harp finished. She paused. Or possibly the castle, Harry said. The castle, she agreed. If it's been watching this situation all year, it might have the ability to intervene in small ways. Accelerate the harp's wind down, make a door creak, create a disturbance. She looked at him. That's speculation. Good speculation, he said. What's below the trapdoor? That's where it gets interesting. She pulled a book toward him, Magical Protections and Their Historical Applications, a 4th-year text she'd gotten from the restricted section with a note from Flitwick that she suspected he hadn't quite intended as permission for this particular line of research. The protection configurations that match what I felt in the residue, the combination is consistent with something that needs to be found by someone, not just guarded, like a series of tests. Each layer requires a different kind of skill. Harry was quiet for a moment, reading where she was pointing. Someone designed this intentionally, not just to guard something, but to guard it in a way where the right person can get through. Yes, which means someone anticipated that the right person might need to. Yes, and put the thing at Hogwarts specifically. He leaned back, so whatever this is, it was always going to end up here. Someone planned it. Dumbledore, she said. Harry nodded. But working with someone else, the design is collaborative. You can feel different magical signatures in the layers, even from the surface, different styles. She stared at him. You got all that from a residue read at 3 in the morning. I've been thinking about it since 3 in the morning, he said. She made a note. The library filled slowly around them, early risers, mostly Ravenclaws and a few diligent Hufflepuffs, and they worked through the morning in comfortable parallel, trading books and observations, building a picture of what was beneath the third floor in a series of careful logical steps. It was, Hermione thought, the most efficient research partnership she'd ever had, primarily because Harry read differently than she did. She went deep, vertically, following one thread until she'd exhausted it. Harry read laterally, connecting things that didn't seem adjacent, arriving at conclusions via routes she wouldn't have taken and turning out to be right in ways that made her reconsider the routes themselves. Philosopher's Stone, she said, at approximately 9 o'clock. He looked up. Nicholas Flamel, she said. I read about him in Alchemy and its discontents, only the brief mention because it's not the focus of that book, but he's the only known maker of a Philosopher's Stone which grants immortality and can transmute base metals to gold. He's been alive for 600 years. If someone with knowledge of alchemy wanted to hide the most valuable object in the magical world, this is the kind of protection they'd build. She tapped her diagram. And if someone who'd recently lost a body wanted to restore it, they'd need it, Harry said. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at the middle distance with an expression she was beginning to recognize as him processing several things simultaneously. Voldemort's not gone. I've known that since Diagon Alley. The feeling I got from Quirrell, the double presence, the cold thing underneath, that's him. That's what's left of him. She'd arrived at the same conclusion 2 days ago and had been waiting to see how long it took him. Alive enough to possess a host, not alive enough to act independently. She paused, which explains why Quirrell seems off, erratic. He's managing a passenger who wants things he's not sure he can deliver. And the stone is the delivery, Harry said. Restore the body, full power returns. His jaw tightened. Dumbledore knows. Dumbledore knows everything relevant that's happened at this school in the past 40 years, she said. Whether he knows exactly the right things about this situation, I'm less sure. He knows Quirrell is compromised. He suspects he may not know the nature of the compromise. She folded her hands, and even if he does, he's running a strategy, something long-term. He doesn't want to stop this yet, he wants to see where it goes. Which means he'll let it develop to a certain point before he intervenes. Harry looked at her directly. We're not going to let it get to that point. No, she agreed. We're not, she paused. But we also can't tip our hand. If Quirrell knows we're watching, if Voldemort knows, we behave normally, Harry said. We ask questions in defense class, we participate, we don't let on that we know what he is or what he's looking for. Can you manage that? Being in the same room as him without the scar feeling like someone's poking at it with a hot wire, he was very dry about it. I've been managing it since the first class, it's fine. She looked at him. It's not fine, it's manageable, he corrected, which is what matters. He picked up his tea which had gone cold. What we need is to know what's under that trapdoor, all of it, before Quirrell gets there. Agreed. She started writing. I'll work on the enchantment identification. I'll talk to the castle, he said. She looked up. He shrugged slightly. It communicates, not in words, but I can ask it questions if I'm quiet enough. That is, she said, the most Gryffindor thing I've ever heard. Rowena was Gryffindor's best friend, he said. Historically, she stared at him. Magda Whitmore Founders, Fact and Legend, Chapter 9, he said. The library has a copy. It's misshelved under biography instead of history, 3rd row from the back, 2nd shelf. You have the misshelved books memorized. I find them more interesting than the correctly shelved ones, he said, and went back to his reading. And Hermione Granger sat in the Hogwarts library at 9 on a Thursday morning and felt something she wasn't used to feeling in intellectual company, which was thoroughly, completely matched. It was uncomfortable and excellent in approximately equal measure. The Charms classroom on Friday afternoon was warm and slightly chaotic, the way Flitwick's classes tended to be, 21st years all trying to perform the Wingardium Leviosa with varying levels of success, and Flitwick bouncing between them with the speed of a man who has been doing this for 40 years and still finds it delightful, which he genuinely did. Hermione had gotten the feather on her first attempt, but she deliberately delayed demonstrating it, because she'd noticed in the first week that being visibly first and best at everything in every class created social friction that wasn't worth the 5 seconds of satisfaction. She was working on this. It was a process. She kept the feather in a controlled hover 6 inches off the desk and turned her attention to the magical mechanics of what she was doing, feeling the way the charm interfaced with the object's weight and the ambient magic of the room. the subtle adjustments of intention that maintained the float. It was like balancing a ball on a stream of water, she thought. Continuous minor corrections rather than a single sustained effort. How high can you take it? Harry said quietly from beside her, his own feather already at ceiling height and drifting back down on a gentle current he was apparently maintaining with about 30% of his attention. The other 70 was on something she couldn't identify, theoretically limited only by the strength of the incantation and the caster's magical output, she said. Practically, I haven't tested the ceiling of my output yet. That's next week. Harry's feather executed a small, precise figure 8 at ceiling height. Flitwick appeared beside them, beamed, noted something in his ledger, and moved on with the self-possession of someone who has long since stopped being surprised by exceptional students and started simply being pleased by them. Across the room, Ron Weasley's feather had just clipped Seamus Finnegan's, and they were now doing something complicated in the airspace above their shared table that was going to end either in a spell collision or a small explosion. Harry caught Hermione's eye, and they both watched it with the resigned attention of people who have learned to identify where the immediate chaos is coming from. Small explosion, 2 inches of the table singed. Flitwick sighed philosophically. After class, walking the corridor toward the stairs, Ron fell into step beside Harry. He was a straightforward person. Ron, what he thought moved quickly and visibly across his face, which Hermione found simultaneously useful, easy to read, and slightly exhausting. Constant emotional weather. He'd been friendly with her in a general sense since the first week, but their interactions had the particular quality of 2 people who orbited the same person and were still working out their own dynamic. Seamus is going to take someone's eye out, Ron said. His own, probably, Harry said, which is better than the alternative. The table's not going to agree. Ron hitched his bag higher on his shoulder. Did either of you do the potions reading? Because Snape said 2 feet of parchment, and I'm not sure I can find 2 feet of things to say about lacewing flies that aren't just, he made a gesture. The historical significance of lacewing flies in classical potion-making crosses 4 distinct disciplines, Hermione said, because it was true and because if Ron asked her she was going to tell him rather than watch him turn in inadequate work. If you cover the alchemical, the medicinal, the theoretical and the practical application, 2 feet is actually quite light. Ron looked at her. How do you already know all that? I read the book, she said. All of it. Both of the assigned ones and the 3 supplementary texts Snape mentioned in passing during the first lesson. Ron looked at Harry with an expression that communicated wordlessly and with great eloquence. Is she always like this? Harry's expression communicated back. Yes, and it's useful, try to keep up. This exchange happened in approximately 1 second and Hermione caught all of it and said nothing, because she was still working on the process. I'll help you with the reading if you want, she said instead. Not write it for you, but if you need the concepts explained. Ron looked mildly startled, like someone who'd reached for a door expecting it to be locked and found it open. Oh yeah, all right, thanks. He paused. I've got a chess set. If you 2 wanted to, I mean after dinner in the common room. If he was doing the thing people did when they offered something they thought might be declined and were preemptively managing the disappointment. Yes, Harry said. Sure, Hermione said. Ron brightened in the comprehensive way of someone who is fundamentally social and finds solitude slightly alien. Brilliant. He veered off down a side corridor, heading for whatever Ron Weasley navigated toward in his spare moments, and Harry and Hermione continued toward the stairs. He's good, Harry said. He's very transparent, she said. That's not the same as not being good. No, she agreed, it's not. She'd been thinking about this, about the difference between what she'd valued in people before Hogwarts and what was turning out to matter here. In her primary school, she'd valued intellectual peers above all else, and there had been approximately none, and she'd spent 5 years trying to paper over that absence with extra credit and reading lists. Here, intellectual caliber was more common, but what Harry had pointed her toward in his particular unspoken way, by simply treating people like what they actually were rather than what category they fit into, was something else. The understanding that a person's value wasn't solely in what they could contribute to a problem. She was 11 and a half and she was working this out in real time, and the fact that she was working it out was progress. Ron plays chess like a military commander, Harry said. Aggressive openings, willingness to sacrifice, thinks 3 moves ahead when he's engaged but loses track of the board when he's distracted. She looked at him. You've watched him play? In the common room Tuesday night. You were in the library. I'm often in the library, she said. You don't have to be, he said. Not a criticism. An observation offered with the same directness he offered everything. She thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. The defense against the dark arts classroom was cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. Hermione had tested this on 3 separate occasions, standing in the doorway before class and measuring the temperature difference between the corridor and the classroom with careful attention to drafts, airflow and the window positions. The corridor was cold. It was Scotland. It was October. All the corridors were cold. The classroom was colder by a margin that couldn't be explained by the windows which were closed or the door which faced south. The cold came from Quirrell. Or more precisely, from the thing inside Quirrell. This was not information she'd shared with anyone except Harry, and Harry had already known. Today's lesson was on defensive jinxes, the theory, not the practice, because Quirrell spent more time on theory than on practice in a way that she suspected had less to do with pedagogical philosophy and more to do with not wanting his students to get competent at defending themselves. He stood at the front of the room in his purple turban and his nervous hands and delivered the theory in his stop-start stuttering cadence, and Hermione sat in the third row and took notes, and kept the notes accurate and kept her face attentive, and gave every visible indication of being a hard-working first-year student learning about the shield charm for the first time. She'd learned the shield charm from the standard book of spells, grade 3 on the train to Hogwarts. Beside her, Harry was taking notes in his particular way, not transcribing what Quirrell said she'd noticed, but writing what he thought about what Quirrell said, which produced notes that looked on the surface like attentive student work, and were actually a running critical analysis of the lesson's gaps and misdirections. Quirrell's eyes moved over the class with the restlessness of someone who is scanning for something specific and hasn't found it yet. They passed over Harry with the very deliberate not pausing of someone trying hard not to pause. They passed over Hermione and did pause very briefly in a way she caught and marked. After class, the students filing out in the usual surge of released captive energy, Hermione paused at the door to adjust her bag, and the pause gave her the angle to watch Quirrell at his desk. His hands were pressed flat on the desk surface, and he was very still, and the quality of his stillness was wrong in a way she could now identify precisely. It was the stillness of two entities negotiating control of one body. She left. Harry was waiting for her in the corridor, leaning against the wall with his bag over one shoulder. He raised an eyebrow. "He looked at me," she said, walking. "Noticed me, not the way a teacher notices a student. The way something that's been warned about you would notice you." Harry fell into step beside her. "He flinches every time I walk into the room. I know, I've been measuring it. The flinch is Quirrell, the man himself, what's left of his original personality. He knows what you are or what you represent." She thought about this. "He might not know about me. If the nature of the Founder's magic is opaque even to the intelligence using him, then I'm the decoy," Harry said quietly. "And you're not visible yet." She met his eyes. "I don't want to be a decoy." "I know," he said. "I'm not making you one. I'm saying we have an information advantage that we shouldn't waste." He paused. "And also I'd very much prefer that the creature sharing Quirrell's body not get around to noticing the full picture." "Agreed." She shifted her bag. "I think the timeline for the stone is months, not weeks. Quirrell hasn't even attempted the trapdoor in the past 2 weeks. He's collecting information first, which is both intelligent and reassuring." "Intelligent because it's what we do," Harry said. "Reassuring because it means we have time. We need to map the protections," she said, "all of them before Christmas. I'll talk to the castle tonight, and I'll work through the magical theory of protection stack design," she said. "There are only so many ways to construct a layered protection sequence, and if I can identify the construction principles, I can predict what we'll find." They were passing the stairs to the 4th floor, and a cluster of Slytherin second years moved through them, all shoulder and attitude, and Harry and Hermione simply continued their conversation, and the second years navigated around them in the slightly nonplussed way that people tended to navigate around Harry when he wasn't paying them sufficient deference. Draco Malfoy was at the edge of the cluster. He'd been watching Harry since the first week, with the particular attention of someone trying to work out a calculation that keeps coming out wrong. He'd approached once in a corridor on the 3rd day, said something cutting about Hermione's blood status that had been aimed at Harry's reaction, and had gotten instead Harry looking at him with a calm attention that clearly wasn't what he'd expected, and then Hermione saying, "Is this something you'd like to discuss with any actual content, or are you just warming up?" And both of them walking away before he'd finished processing the response. Looked at Harry now, brief and sharp, and Harry looked back with the same calm attention he gave everything, not challenging, not deferential, just present, and Malfoy looked away first and continued down the stairs, and something in the set of his shoulders communicated a complexity of feeling that wasn't the simple contempt he aimed at everyone else. "He wants something from you," Hermione said. "He wants to understand me," Harry said. "He can't right now, which is frustrating him." Sympathy, he considered. Awareness. He's trapped in his circumstances in a way that isn't entirely his own fault, and part of him knows it. He paused. "I'm not going to be his friend if he keeps talking about blood status, but I'm also not going to write him off as a complete loss." She thought about that too. The troll happened on Halloween. In retrospect, and Hermione did a great deal of retrospective processing, it was a characteristic of how her mind worked. The sequence of events that led to the troll was almost elegant in its chaos. Nearly headless Nick had asked Harry for a favor during breakfast. Ron had said something tactless in charms that afternoon that had made her spend 20 minutes in a bathroom, working through the precise geometry of why it had strung. The Hufflepuff prefect had mentioned, within earshot, that Hermione was the kind of person who knew all the rules and none of the important things. She had been sitting in a bathroom stall working through whether this was fair criticism. She'd provisionally decided it was approximately 20% fair when the troll walked in. She would say later that she felt it coming before she heard it. The castle shifted, a ripple in its magical presence, something wrong in the lower levels, and then the smell hit, and then the sound of the door being destroyed, and then 12 feet of mountain troll was in the bathroom looking at her with the dim determination of a creature that has located a target. She did not scream, she assessed. The troll was carrying a club. It moved slowly but with enormous force. The bathroom was small enough that she couldn't get past it to the door without coming within reach of the club. The ceiling was 9 feet. The stalls were solid stone. The window was 12 inches wide and 3 floors up. She had her wand. She cast the shield charm between herself and the troll, not a first-year shield charm, not the theory-only version Quirrell had covered, but the full incantation from the third-year text she'd been practicing in secret for 6 weeks, and the shield went up solid and visible, and the troll walked into it and stopped, confused, which bought her 4 seconds to think. The door behind the troll exploded inward. Harry came through it at a dead run, wand already out, took in the scene in approximately half a second and said, "Nice shield." "Thank you," she said. "I've been practicing. I can tell." He was looking at the troll, which had recovered from the shield impact and turned toward the noise. "Can you maintain it while I work on something?" "For about 90 seconds, she said. "That's plenty." He didn't do what she expected, which was to try a stunning spell, which was almost certainly above first-year practical ability levels for most students, but which she'd also been practicing and was going to try if Harry's plan didn't work, which she was already calculating as a fallback. Instead, Harry moved to the left, fluid and fast, and cast. She watched his wand movement, precise and deliberate, Levioso on the troll's club. The club shot upward and collided with the troll's head on its way up. The troll went down, not dead, stunned, swaying, sinking to the ground with the slow inevitability of a very large tree after a very significant impact. Harry stepped back to stand beside her, and the shield went down because she released it, and they both looked at the troll on the floor. "That was elegant," she said. "Efficient," he said. "Same thing." He looked at her. "Ron's in the corridor." "He's fine. He raised the alarm when he couldn't find you. We should probably look appropriately shaken." "I am somewhat shaken," she said. "Good, then this will be convincing." The door opened again and McGonagall came in, followed by Professors Sprout and Quirrell, and the expression on McGonagall's face moved through several distinct stages in rapid succession: relief, confusion, something very close to awe, then the professional composure she kept for situations that required it. She looked at the troll on the floor. She looked at Harry and Hermione standing next to each other, neither of them in obvious distress, Hermione's wand still in her hand and Harry's already away. "What," McGonagall said carefully, "happened here?" "The troll came in," Harry said. "We managed." "You managed?" "I put a shield charm up," Hermione said, which was true, and Harry levitated its club into its head, also true. She decided on the approach in the 3 seconds between the door exploding and McGonagall arriving. Give the true account, give the full account, give it without minimizing, and let the adults process it as they would. McGonagall looked at Harry. "You levitated the club." "Wingardium Leviosa," Harry said. "We covered it in charms." "Into its head." "The path of least resistance," he said, pleasantly. McGonagall looked at Professor Quirrell. Quirrell looked at Harry with the expression of someone who has been told to be afraid of something and is having that fear confirmed. He turned and left the bathroom, and McGonagall watched him go with a very slight narrowing of the eyes that told Hermione more about what McGonagall suspected than anything the professor would say out loud. Ron appeared in the doorway, looked at the troll, looked at Harry and Hermione and said, "Bloody hell." 10 points to Gryffindor each, McGonagall said, in the voice of someone who knows the gesture is inadequate but has to begin somewhere. "And well done, both of you." She said it like the words surprised her slightly coming out, and that was the most genuine compliment Hermione had received in a long time. They filed out past the troll. Ron walked on Harry's other side, a kind of post-adrenaline electricity in him that hadn't worked out what to do with itself yet. "You've been practicing shield charms," he said to Hermione. "Yes," she said. "Third-year ones." "Yes, and you," he looked at Harry, "knocked out a mountain troll by bouncing its own club off its head." "The anatomy suggested the head was the most vulnerable point," Harry said. Ron was quiet for a moment. "I want to learn that," he said, and it came out less like a statement and more like a decision, the kind people make when they've just seen something that rearranges their understanding of what's possible. "I'll teach you," Harry said, "both of you, or we can teach each other." He glanced at Hermione. "We should probably be doing this systematically anyway." "I've been thinking that since September," she said. "I know you have," he said. "I have notes." "I assumed." Ron looked between them. "Are you two always like this?" "Like what?" they said at approximately the same time. "Never mind," Ron said and laughed, and the three of them walked back to Gryffindor Tower in the aftermath of Halloween, and it felt different than before, like something had been established, not stated, not agreed upon out loud, but built brick by brick in the way things that last are always built. Dumbledore was quiet for a long time after McGonagall finished her account. His office was warm, enchanted for it, heating charms layered into the stone over decades, and Fawkes was sleeping on his perch with the boneless ease of a phoenix in his fallow phase, and outside the windows Hogwarts was settling into the deep quiet of midnight. "A third-year shield charm," he said eventually. "Maintained for how long?" She estimated 90 seconds. She said she released it voluntarily when it was no longer needed, not when her output failed. McGonagall was standing by the window, her arms folded, watching him with the particular patience she reserved for conversations she knew would take a while. Minerva's shield is typically a sixth-year spell under pressure conditions, and the boy wandlessly directed the levitation charm's trajectory to target the troll's own weapon against it. McGonagall paused. Flitwick says Potter's charm work has been extraordinary. He's been very careful to perform at approximately first-year level in He's not been nearly careful enough for Phileas to miss it. No, Dumbledore said, he wouldn't be. He looked at his hands for a moment. And the girl, same caliber of discipline. Granger is Albus I've been teaching for 38 years. I've had exceptional students, I've had prodigies. What Granger has is not, it's not more of the same thing in greater quantities, it's structurally different. The way she processes magical theory is different qualitatively from how any student I've taught processes it. She paused. Both of them are different in this way. Yes, Dumbledore said, you're not surprised. No, he said, I'm not surprised. He looked up. I'm concerned. About what I didn't predict. He stood and moved to the window to stand beside her, looking out at the dark grounds. I've been planning for a specific situation, Minerva, a specific shape of events. I had a role for Harry, carefully considered, carefully positioned. The role did not include, he stopped. A partner, McGonagall said. A partner, someone who is apparently his equal or very nearly in the scope of the gift they've both received. He was quiet. I don't know where she fits in the pattern I've built, and that concerns me because it suggests the pattern was built with incomplete information. McGonagall looked at him. Or, she said quietly but with an edge, it suggests the pattern was built around the wrong assumptions entirely. Dumbledore was silent for a long time. Whatever happened in 1981, McGonagall continued, was not what any of us thought it was. Those children are not simply gifted students. They are, I don't have the right vocabulary for it, Albus, and I suspect neither do you, and I would very much recommend we all spend less time trying to fit them into the plans we've already made. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting, she said firmly, that we tell them the truth, whatever we know of it. Dumbledore considered this for a long time. Not yet, he said. McGonagall's expression was eloquent. Not yet, he said again, more gently. Give me time to understand what we're working with. And while you're taking that time, they're working it out themselves, she said. They've been working it out since September. At some point, Albus, they'll have the full picture before you decide to give it to them, and then you'll have lost the only advantage you might have had. She left, and Dumbledore stood at his window for a very long time. November moved through Hogwarts in its usual way, cold settling in, the lock going grey, the first Quidditch match filling the air with anticipation and the grounds with students in scarves. Harry had been put on the Gryffindor Quidditch team after being caught on a broom by McGonagall under circumstances that were difficult to explain without mentioning Malfoy or the self-correcting Remembrall, and he played Seeker with the same quality he brought to everything, apparently easy, deeply precise, paying attention to three things more than anyone else could track. Hermione went to the match with Ron and Neville and sat in the Gryffindor stands and watched Harry on the broom with the abstract appreciation of someone who doesn't particularly care about sport but can recognize excellence when she sees it. He moved like something that had been designed for this, which she thought was actually approximately accurate if you accepted that Godric Gryffindor had been known for aerial combat, which the history texts did confirm. Ron explained the rules in great detail. She knew the rules already, but she let him explain them because he was enthusiastic about it, and his enthusiasm was genuinely charming in the way that genuine things tended to be. Hermione watched the match and she watched Quirrell in the staff box, and at the moment Harry's broom began behaving wrongly, bucking, veering, doing things broomsticks didn't do, she had her wand out and her eyes on the staff box. Quirrell's lips were moving. She'd had 3 weeks to think about Voldemort and the stone and the protections below the trapdoor, and she'd spent 2 of those weeks reading about curse maintenance and line-of-sight magic and the mechanics of enchanted objects under hostile influence. She pointed her wand at Quirrell's robes and set them on fire, not dangerously. Not with any intent to harm the man. Quirrell, whatever the thing inside him, was still a human being with legal protections, and she was 11 years old and was working within that framework. But a small, targeted, precisely controlled incendio to the hem of his turban would do the job. She was already putting it out agumenti by the time anyone in the staff box noticed. Quirrell leapt up, the concentration broke, and Harry's broom immediately steadied. Neville said, "Did you just—" "I spilled something," she said. Ron looked at her. "You didn't spill anything." "I'm very clumsy sometimes," she said, and watched Harry's broom through the rest of the match with the particular satisfaction of a problem efficiently addressed. Harry caught the snitch 14 minutes later. She watched him land, gold ball in hand, and look across the crowd in her direction with the accuracy of someone who knows exactly where to look. And he held up the snitch and looked at her, and she saw him recognize in the way she was watching him that she'd known what was happening, that he'd been in danger, that she'd dealt with it. He didn't stop smiling, but the smile changed slightly, something more real coming into it, something that didn't perform for the crowd. He knew she was there. He knew she was paying attention. She turned back to Ron, who was celebrating with the volume of someone who takes Quidditch very seriously, and she let herself feel quietly, genuinely satisfied. "Quirrell tried to jinx my broom," Harry said. They were in the corner of the common room after the post-match celebrations had reached a stage where they could step sideways from them without being noticed. The fire was low. Most of Gryffindor was still loud and happy in the center of the room. "Yes," Hermione said, "and you set his robes on fire, his turban technically, and put it out immediately. I wasn't trying to harm him, just interrupt the concentration." He looked at her, his Quidditch robes were still on, red against the firelight. "You had it planned before the match started." "I had it as a contingency," she said. "I've been thinking about the ways Voldemort might move against you while he's building toward the stone. Disruption rather than direct confrontation. He can't act directly as long as he needs Quirrell, and Quirrell needs to maintain his position at the school. So indirect action, targeted interference." She paused. The broom made the most sense as a vector. "So you sat in the stands ready to deal with it?" "I sat in the stands watching Quirrell," she said. "Yes." Harry was quiet for a moment. "You should have told me. You would have been distracted." "I don't get distracted." "You would have been aware of an additional layer of complexity during a situation that already required complete concentration," she corrected, "which isn't the same as distracted but has similar performance implications." He held her gaze for a long moment. "Fair," he said, "but tell me next time." "Yes," she said, because he was right. "I will." He nodded. They were close together in the corner. The room pressed everyone together when it was full, and the fire made everything amber, and the noise of the celebration was a wall of sound that gave them privacy of a kind. "What did it feel like?" she asked. "When the broom was going," he thought about it, "like trying to stand on something that's decided it wants you gone," he said. "The Founder's magic helped kept the awareness up. I could feel the external influence on the broom." He paused. "And I could feel you in the stands." She looked at him. "You could feel me." "When you're using magic," he said with the care of someone choosing words precisely, "I can feel the direction of it, the quality of it. I've been able to since September. I assumed you could feel mine as well." She opened her mouth, closed it, thought about this. "I can," she said slowly. "I assumed it was general magical awareness, the Founder's magic affecting my perceptive range." "It might be," he said. "Or it might be more specific than that." Neither of them pursued this. It was the kind of thread that needed careful handling before pulling. "We need to go down through the trapdoor," Harry said, "before Christmas." "Agreed," she said. "I've finished the protection stack analysis. I know what we're going to face." "Tell me." She did, quietly in the noisy room while the celebrations went on around them. 7 layers, what each one required. She'd worked out all of it except the final one, which she suspected was Flamel's own and would be alchemical. Harry listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "The chess one will need Ron." "I know," she said. "He'll come." "I know that too," she said. "I'm not worried about Ron." "What are you worried about?" She looked into the fire. "The final layer, Flamel's. I don't know what form it takes, and I don't like having an unknown variable at the critical point." "We'll handle it when we see it," he said. "That's very Gryffindor of you," she said. "Rowena was Gryffindor's best friend," he said, and she laughed. And across the room Ron caught the sound and grinned without knowing why, the way people grin when they see something good happening even if they can't name it. December's first week brought frost and the end-of-term energy that made the whole castle feel slightly pressurized. Exams ahead, holidays approaching, the particular social weather of 500 people all tired and excited simultaneously. In the library, Hermione and Harry had accumulated a table that was increasingly recognized as their table, and Neville had started sitting there because Neville had, over the course of the term, quietly and without fanfare, decided that Harry and Hermione were the safest people in the building. This was not inaccurate. Neville was not who people thought he was. He was nervous, yes, catastrophically nervous in the particular way of people who have been told their whole lives that they're less than they are and have started to believe it. But underneath the nerves was a person with extraordinary patience, genuine kindness, and a specific brand of courage that Harry identified early and Hermione took slightly longer to see. The courage of someone who is afraid of everything and keeps going anyway. "Trevor got loose again," Neville said by way of sitting down. "He was in the charms corridor earlier," Harry said. "Third alcove on the left, behind the tapestry." Neville brightened immediately. "How did you? I heard him when I walked past." "Oh." Neville went and got the toad, came back and settled into his chair with Trevor in his hands. He looked at the books on the table. He'd long since stopped asking about them. "Is this about the third floor thing?" Hermione looked up sharply. Harry continued reading. Neville had his eyes on Trevor. I mean, I don't know what's up there, but I can tell you've been working on something specific since September, and it's not just homework." He said it with a studied casualness that was covering a fair degree of anxiety. "You don't have to tell me, if it's dangerous, I'd rather know." Hermione looked at Harry. Harry looked at Neville. "It's dangerous," Harry said. "We're managing it." "Can I help?" Neville said. "Not yet," Harry said, "but maybe. There's a layer that might need 3 people." Neville nodded, absorbing this, and went back to his herbology reading with Trevor sitting on his shoulder. That was all. He didn't push, didn't probe, didn't require reassurance or more information than was offered. Hermione watched him for a moment and then went back to her notes. Under the table, her foot found the base of the chair leg, and she adjusted her position, and the Founder's magic moved through her like something satisfied, and she thought, this is what Hufflepuff meant by loyalty, not devotion to an idea, devotion to the people in front of you exactly as they are. She wrote it down in her purple notebook because she wrote down the things that mattered. Outside, the first snow of the year began to fall on Hogwarts, and the castle breathed slowly in the white, and somewhere below them 7 layers of protection waited in the dark, patient and purposeful for the people who were coming to find them. Not yet, but soon. Chapter 3, What the Stone Teaches. The snow came down hard on the last Saturday before Christmas break, and Harry sat on the windowsill of an empty classroom on the 4th floor and listened to the castle. He'd been doing this since October, finding the quiet rooms, pressing his back against the cold glass and simply being still enough to hear what Hogwarts had to say. It didn't speak in language. It spoke in the way that large, ancient, thoroughly inhabited places spoke, in temperature changes and the direction of drafts and the subtle magnetic pull that made you want to turn left rather than right, to go up rather than down. It spoke in the way a sleeping animal's breathing changed when it registered something nearby. Tonight it was telling him something was moving, not in the castle itself, below it. The layers of protection beneath the 3rd floor had a specific magical signature that he'd been tracking for weeks, the way you track weather patterns or the behavior of a river. Each layer had its own resonance, and he'd learned to feel them the way you learn to feel the strings of an instrument, individually and in combination. Tonight the topmost layer was disturbed, not penetrated, not broken, but tested. Someone running their hands along the outside of something, probing for weakness. He dropped off the windowsill and went to find Hermione. She was in the library, of course she was. At 10 on a Saturday night, most of Gryffindor was in the common room doing the kind of relaxed pre-holiday nothing that came naturally to people who'd finished their work. But Hermione had finished her work at 4 and then started additional work, because Hermione's relationship with not working was still a project in progress. He slid into the seat across from her, Quirrell's testing the outer layer. She looked up. Her hair was even more spectacular than usual, which happened when she'd been running her hands through it while thinking, testing or breaching, testing, like I said, probing for structure, not attempting entry. He folded his arms on the table, but the pattern's changed. He's been avoiding the corridor for 3 weeks and now he's back. Something's shifted. The holidays, she said immediately. Most students go home, staff numbers thin, the castle's active attention is divided differently. She tapped her pen against her notebook. He's recalculating the timing. He thinks this is the window, which means we need to go before the break, not after. She was already closing her books. We need Ron, and we need tonight, because if he's moved back to active testing, the attempt could come as early as Christmas week. Harry was already up. I'll get Ron, get Neville too, she said. We may need him for the plant's layer. Sprout's protection has Devil's Snare characteristics, and Neville knows Devil's Snare better than either of us. We don't need him further in, but we might need him at the start. He paused. You're sure about Ron and Neville? Once they're involved, they've been involved since we started telling them things, she said. The involvement question was answered in October. The question now is whether we're treating them like partners or like people we're protecting. She looked at him steadily. I think we should treat everyone in our orbit like partners. I think it's both more ethical and more effective. He held her gaze for a moment. I already agreed with you 3 seconds ago internally. Then stop being slow and get Ron and Neville. He got Ron and Neville. Ron's reaction to, we think there's a powerful magical object beneath the 3rd floor corridor being targeted by Voldemort's shade, which is currently possessing Professor Quirrell, and we need to go through 7 layers of protection to stop him, was a sequence of expressions that Hermione watched with the focused attention she gave most things. Blank surprise, disbelief, a rapid calculation, and then the kind of settled determination that confirmed Harry's read of him as someone who thought tactically even when he was frightened. The chess one, he said. That's me. That's you, Harry confirmed. Ron nodded. When? Now, Harry said. Another brief sequence of expressions, this one faster, resolving almost immediately into action. Ron put down his chess piece. He'd had it in his hand when they came in, studying it, which Hermione found she didn't find surprising at all, and stood up. Right, let's go. Neville's reaction was more internal and longer, but it arrived at the same place. He put Trevor carefully in his bedside box, got his wand, said Devil's Snare likes the dark and cold, you'll want to stay calm, and followed them out the door. They moved through the castle in the particular way the 4 of them had developed without quite discussing it. Harry at the front because his spatial awareness was extraordinary, and he moved like he owned every room he walked into. Hermione slightly behind and to his right, processing everything in real time, Ron and Neville behind them. The castle accommodated them, routes shortening, a door appearing where they'd been walled 2 days ago. The 3rd floor corridor was empty. The door's enchantments had been tested. Harry could feel the marks in the magical residue, fresh and purposeful, but not broken. He undid them from the outside with a sequence of counter-charms that he and Hermione had worked out in November, each one peeling back a layer the way you'd peel back the rind of something. Hermione watched him work with the focused attention she gave to things that impressed her, which meant she was cataloguing the wand movements and the intentional structure simultaneously. Third one from the left on the 5th counter, she said quietly. The release sequence is backwards from what I expected. Godric's variant, he said, not stopping. Older construction, he built things to open outward from the center. She made a note in her head. The door opened. The room beyond it was cold and dark and smelled of something enormous and animal. The dog, 3 heads, 12 feet from nose to tail, the kind of size that registered not as a visual impression but as a gravitational fact, was awake, because no one had played the harp this time, and all 3 heads turned toward the door with the slow deliberation of something that has never needed to hurry. Harry stepped forward. Hermione knew what he was going to do because she'd read Magda Whitmore's Founders, Fact and Legend after he'd mentioned it, and she'd found Chapter 9, and it had mentioned in passing that Godric Gryffindor had a gift with animals that went beyond the ordinary, a communication that wasn't language but was more than feeling. He crouched down. He looked at the middle head, the dominant one she'd noted from their first encounter, and he made a sound that wasn't a word in any human language, something low and resonant from somewhere in his chest, and the middle head's ears went from flat-back defensive to sideways, which on a dog the size of a small house was a visible and significant change. The other 2 heads tracked the middle one, followed its register. The growl, which had been building since the door opened, a vibration felt in the sternum before it was heard, subsided. Ron, behind her, said very quietly, "Bloody hell." Harry stood up, still holding the middle head's attention, and said to them without looking away from the dog, "Go around the left side, the trapdoor's in the center. I'll follow once you're past." They went. Neville had his wand up and his face set with the careful concentration of someone managing fear by focusing very hard on the task. Ron moved like he was navigating a battlefield, which was, Hermione thought, essentially accurate. She went last, keeping the dog's other 2 heads in her peripheral vision, and then Harry was beside her and the trapdoor was beneath their feet. "Well done," she told him. "He's a good dog," Harry said, which made Ron make a sound like a laugh strangled to death by anxiety. Harry opened the trapdoor. The darkness below was absolute, which meant something. "I'll go first," Harry said. "We'll go together," Hermione said. A brief pause. "Together," he agreed. They dropped. The fall was longer than expected and softer than it had any right to be. They landed in something that immediately started moving, rapping, climbing, alive in the directed way that plants were alive when they'd been given purpose. "Devil's snare," Neville said with the calm authority of someone in their native territory. "Don't fight it, relax everything, let your weight go." Ron's natural response to being wrapped by carnivorous plant matter was the opposite of relaxing everything. "Neville, trust me," Neville said sharply, and Ron went still. Hermione had already relaxed, felt the devil's snare's grip loosen around her torso, and was sinking through it smoothly, thinking as she went, "Sprout designed this well. The instinct against it is exactly what makes it deadly. You defeat it by doing the thing fear tells you not to do." She filed that thought. They were through in 40 seconds. The floor below was stone, and they were standing in a chamber lit by blue light from some source she couldn't immediately identify. Magical phosphorescence, she catalogued, probably enchanted into the ceiling, and ahead of them was the sound of wings. 100 keys, all of them flying. She looked up. Harry looked up. Ron looked up and said, "There's a broom." One broom mounted on the wall, broomstick and old but functional, clearly part of the design. "One broom, one correct key, 100 wrong ones," Hermione said, already scanning them. She was looking for the pattern. There was always a pattern because magical protection designs were created by human minds and human minds had structural tells. The right key will be different from the others in some way. The difference might be size or color variation or wear pattern. She found it. There, blue and silver one, near the ceiling, moving slightly faster than the others. "It's been used before. There's wear on the wing where it's been caught." Harry was already on the broom. He was extraordinary in the air, which she already knew, but watching him in a confined space with a specific target was different from watching him play Quidditch. He moved through the other keys like water moving through gaps, not forcing a path, finding it, and the target key was dodging, which meant it was enchanted with evasion instincts, but Harry adjusted for the evasion pattern after 2 feints and caught it on the 3rd attempt with a clean reach. He landed. He held up the key. 12 seconds, Ron said. "I was aiming for 10, Harry said. "There are 100 keys, Ron said. "Next time." They moved through the arch. The key unlocked into the next chamber, and Hermione felt the magical signature of it before she saw what it contained, and what she felt made something in her chest tighten in the particular way that meant dangerous and important. The chess set was enormous. Life-sized pieces in black and white stone, arranged in mid-game, and the board was the entire floor of the chamber, 30 squares across. The path through it on the far side blocked by the white pieces in a formation that was, she studied it, not random. It was a specific position, designed. Ron stood at the edge of it and went very, very still. She'd seen Ron play chess 3 times, and what she'd observed was exactly what Harry had described: aggressive, sacrificial, tactically fearless. But this stillness was different. This was the stillness of someone reading something complex, and the complexity was unfolding behind their eyes in real time. "Black's in trouble," he said quietly, almost to himself. "White's 3 moves from a forced mate, but he moved 2 steps left, changed his angle. Black can redirect the pressure. One sacrifice in the middle game forces White to spend 2 moves responding, and in those 2 moves, he was quiet for another 10 seconds. "Right," he said and turned to them. "I need to be the knight." The Knight, Neville said. The Black Knight, Ron confirmed. He looked at Harry and Hermione. You need to be Bishop's middle rank, second from the center. Hermione left, Harry right. He glanced at Neville. Neville, Rook far left. Don't move unless I tell you. They took their positions. The stone pieces they replaced stepped aside with the solemnity of something with purpose, and then Hermione was standing on the board and the board was alive, the white pieces watching them with the impassive attention of things designed for exactly this. Ron played. She'd thought she understood from watching him in the common room what he was doing when he played chess. She realized now that she'd been seeing the output and not the process. What Ron was doing was not calculating moves. It was something more intuitive and more aggressive, a physical grammar of position and pressure, and the willingness to spend what needed to be spent to create the opening he needed. He called moves in a voice that was quiet and absolutely certain, the nerves she was used to seeing in him entirely absent, and the white pieces moved in response with the force of things that meant it. And when two of them took black pieces off the board, a pawn, then the rook Neville had been. Ron didn't flinch, just recalculated and called the next move. She was moved twice. Both times she went where Ron said without question, because she was watching the board and the logic of it was beautiful, genuinely beautiful, and she was following it in real time, and she saw before the final move what he was setting up. The knight, Ron himself, riding into a position where the white queen would take him, leaving the path clear. Ron, she said. I know, he said. Ron, Hermione. He looked at her across the board. His face was very calm. I know what I'm doing. Just make sure Harry gets through. Harry was looking at Ron with an expression she'd only seen a few times, when something surprised him so fully that the careful, habitual control dropped for a moment. Ron, it's chess, Ron said with a deliberateness that meant it was not chess, it was something bigger than chess. It was the translation of all the things he couldn't say about who they were to each other into the language of a game he'd always spoken fluently. Win, he said simply, and come back. He rode the knight into the queen's path. The white queen moved with terrible efficiency. The path was clear. Harry looked at Hermione. She looked back at him. Something moved between them in the connected way of the Founders' magic and the specific closeness of two people who'd spent 4 months learning each other from the inside out. Go, she said. I'll stay with Ron. He held her eyes for a moment. I'll be back in 10 minutes. I'll be here, she said. He went. She crossed to Ron, who had been deposited at the side of the board by the white queen with rough efficiency but was alive and moving, trying to sit up. She got beside him and helped him up, and he said, "Did he get through?" "He got through." Ron exhaled. He looked at the board, the scattered pieces, the positions, the story of the game still visible in where everything had ended up. "It was a good game," he said, with the satisfaction of someone who has always measured themselves against problems bigger than themselves and found tonight that the measure was adequate. "It was," she said, and meant it. Harry moved through the final chamber alone, and the Founder's magic moved with him, all 4 parts of it very quiet, very present, the way they went when something significant was near. The room was small and lit by a torch that burned with a cold, clear light. At the end of it was a mirror. He knew the mirror. He didn't know how he knew it. He'd never seen it. There was no reason to recognize it, but the moment he walked in, the Founder's magic identified it with a certainty that didn't require explanation. The mirror of Erist. He could feel what it did before he looked into it. It showed you what you most deeply desired, and it made the wanting feel like truth. And standing in front of it, hands clasped behind his back, was Quirinus Quirrell. He didn't have the stutter right now. That was the first thing Harry noted. The nervous, halting cadence was gone, replaced by a stillness that was the stillness of the other presence, the one that wore Quirrell the way you wore a coat. Harry walked in. He didn't slow down or hesitate, and he didn't stop at a cautious distance. He walked to the center of the room and stood 12 feet from Quirrell and the mirror, and he said, "You haven't gotten it yet." Quirrell turned. His face was wearing an expression that had nothing of Quirrell's nervousness in it. The eyes were flat and assessing, and they landed on Harry with a quality of attention that was ancient and cold and had seen a great many things die. "Harry Potter," said a voice, and it was coming from Quirrell's mouth, but it wasn't Quirrell's voice. Beneath the turban, something shifted. "I wondered when you would come." "I've been watching you since September," Harry said. "You've been moving carefully, more carefully than expected. Which means you're aware you're operating at reduced capacity and you're compensating." A long pause. The eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, in re-evaluation. "You are not what I expected." "No," Harry said, "I'm not." "You are 11 years old," Voldemort said through Quirrell's mouth, as though this were a fact he was testing the weight of. "I'm aware of my age." The prophecy, a pause. "There is something different about you, the magic. I can feel it, old magic, very old from before the heist." "What are you?" "I'm the person who's come to make sure you don't get what you came for," Harry said. He looked at the mirror. "The stone is in there, but you've been standing here for how long, and you haven't been able to take it? Because the mirror gives you what you want, and what you want is to have it already, to be restored already, and the mirror shows you that instead of giving it to you." The flatness in Voldemort's expression shifted into something that wasn't quite anger. Anger implied losing control of something, and he hadn't fully lost anything yet. What it shifted into was recognition, of being seen accurately by someone who shouldn't be able to see accurately. "Intelligent," Voldemort said. "Too intelligent for 11. The stone," Harry said, "is not for you. Not tonight, not through this mirror, not through Quirrell." He walked forward 2 more steps closer now, and the Founder's magic moved up through him like warmth, like something gathering. And you know that some part of you, the part that's been in this room for however long without getting what you want, already knows it. You cannot stop me, Voldemort said, and the voice had a different quality now, still cold, still ancient, but with a pressure behind it, something leaning against the walls. I'm not trying to stop you, Harry said. I'm trying to end you. He looked into the mirror. What he saw was not himself restored, not himself triumphant, not any of the things the mirror typically showed, the deepest want, the worst want, the want that secretly drove everything. What he saw was ordinary, a kitchen table with people around it. Specific faces he knew from photographs he'd carried his whole life, and 2 new ones, brown-haired and serious, and the table had food on it and someone was laughing. And it was so unremarkable and so complete that his chest did something that wasn't pain but was adjacent to it. He felt the stone appear in his pocket. The mirror had given it to him because wanting to use it, wanting the power, the restoration, the immortality, wasn't what he wanted. He simply wanted to make sure no one else used it badly. The mirror's enchantment, designed by someone who understood the geometry of desire, had delivered it to exactly the wrong person from Voldemort's perspective. He put his hand in his pocket and wrapped his fingers around it, and he felt through his palm the cool density of something 600 years old, and he turned back to Voldemort. "Give it to me," Voldemort said. The voice was very quiet. That was worse somehow than volume. Harry said, "I can give you things you want, Potter. I can give you your parents back." Harry looked at him. "No," he said, "you can't." "Power. I have power," Harry said. "Enough. Your life. You can't take my life in this body," Harry said with the directness of someone who has thought about this carefully. "What's left of you can barely maintain control of Quirrell. You're not strong enough for a direct attack on me, and you know it, because if you were, you'd have done it when I walked in." He paused. "You're running a negotiation because you have no other options right now, and you're too intelligent not to know that I know that." A very long silence. In the silence, something happened to Quirrell's face, a tremor, a crack, the man beneath the occupation reasserting himself briefly, his hands coming up to his head. The voice, when it came again, had a different quality, less controlled, the cold thing in it displaced by something rawer. "What are you?" Voldemort said again, and this time it wasn't assessment. It was something closer to the existential confrontation of encountering the first thing in decades that genuinely didn't fit his model of the world. "I told you," Harry said. "I'm the person who came to make sure you don't get this." He held up the stone, felt Voldemort's attention snap to it with a force that was almost physical. "And now I'm going to destroy it." "You can't." "I can." He could. He'd known since he touched it that the Founder's magic had the capacity. Salazar Slytherin had built alchemical knowledge into his contribution to the bequest, and alchemy was the art of transformation at the deepest level, the conversion of one thing into something fundamentally other. The stone was a made thing, it could be unmade. "I'm going to destroy it because as long as it exists, you'll come for it, someone will, and the thing you do with immortality is survive," Voldemort said. "Is live. That is all I have ever wanted." "No," Harry said, and his voice was very quiet, with no anger in it, which was somehow the most devastating response he could give. "That's not what you wanted. You wanted to never be afraid again, and there's not an object in the world that does that." He crushed the stone. He didn't crush it physically, he didn't have the leverage. He crushed it the way the Founder's magic crushed things, from the inside out, the way fire transformed wood into something it could never be again. The stone came apart in his hand in a cascade of light, warm gold and deep red, and the light rose to the ceiling and dissipated, and what he was holding afterward was dust and warmth and nothing else. Quirrell screamed. Not Voldemort, Quirrell the man, a sound of pure shock and pain, and something like terrible relief that Harry recognized as the feeling of a terrible weight abruptly lifted. The physical contact between Harry's Founder's gifted magic and the fragment of Voldemort's soul was catastrophic for the fragment. He could see it. The black tearing from Quirrell's form like smoke from a fire when the fuel runs out, and Quirrell collapsed, and the cold presence in the room contracted and sharpened and then dispersed, thinning in all directions at once, looking for the exit with the desperation of something that knows the house is burning. It found the exit. Harry felt the moment it left, a dropping, a clearing, the way a room feels after something that's been quietly wrong is corrected. He crouched beside Quirrell, who was breathing, barely but breathing. He picked up his wand. He cast the Patronus he'd been practicing since October. Nothing emerged. He was 11 and it was an advanced charm, but the intent of it was correct, and the intent was enough to warm the air in the room, and that was what mattered. He stood up. "Albus," he said to the room, because Dumbledore was there, he could feel him, had been able to sense approximately the key chamber, a presence as distinctive as a weather pattern, old and intricate and paying extremely close attention. "Quirrell needs a Mediwitch. He's alive." A door appeared in the wall that hadn't been there before. Dumbledore walked through it. He looked at Quirrell on the floor. He looked at Harry standing beside the mirror, empty-handed. He looked at the mirror, which was showing him something he didn't share. "The stone," he said. "Gone," Harry said. A very long pause. "You destroyed it." "Yes." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time, and what was in his face, beneath the composure, beneath the calculation, beneath everything he'd built over decades of managing situations according to a plan he'd developed such faith in that the plan had become its own kind of obstacle, was something Harry recognized. He'd felt it himself earlier looking in the mirror. The feeling of having the thing you thought you wanted removed and not knowing yet whether you were relieved or devastated. Harry, Dumbledore said, I think we need to talk. We do, Harry agreed. But not tonight. Tonight Quirrell needs medical attention and my friends are in the chest chamber. He paused. And Professor, I already know more than you think I do. When we talk, I'd appreciate it if we started from that assumption. Another pause longer. Something in Dumbledore's expression shifted, moved, settled differently than before. Very well, he said finally, and the two words carried in them the acknowledgement of a revision, something fundamental, reconsidered. Thank you, Harry said, and went back through the door to find Hermione and Ron and Neville, and the castle lit his way as clearly and directly as though it were carrying a lamp for him. The hospital wing at midnight was quiet except for Ron's breathing, which was the deep, untroubled breathing of someone who'd done an enormous thing and was now sleeping it off. Madame Pomfrey had pronounced his injuries minor, a bruised shoulder, a cut above his ear from when the White Queen had deposited him rather forcefully, and had put him to bed with the authority of a woman who took no arguments from anyone, including people who'd just defeated a transfigured chess set. Neville had gone back to the tower with a cup of Madame Pomfrey's restorative tea and the quiet dignity of someone who'd gone where he was asked, and done what was needed and expected nothing particular for it. Harry and Hermione sat in chairs beside Ron's bed. The hospital wing was silver in the moonlight from the tall windows, and the castle was very still around them, the particular still of 3 in the morning when the world has run out of urgency for a moment. Tell me, Hermione said. He told her all of it, the mirror, the stone, Quirrell, the conversation with Voldemort. He told it plainly, in order, without embellishment or minimizing the way she'd noticed he told things he considered important. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. You destroyed it, she said. Yes, the stone, a 600-year-old alchemical artifact capable of producing the elixir of life and unlimited gold. Yes. By using Slytherin's alchemical bequest, as far as I can tell, she looked at her hands. I would have thought of destroying it eventually, she said, and it was neither humble nor defensive, just a precise accounting, but I don't know that I'd have gotten there in the mirror room. You'd have gotten there faster in the research phase, he said. The plan was to secure it, she said. Hide it better, move it. I wasn't thinking about the fact that as long as it existed, someone would come for it, he said. Voldemort or someone else eventually, the value is too high. The destruction was the right answer, she said, and the saying of it had the quality of someone learning something, really learning it, not just accepting it as intellectually valid. Because some problems aren't containment problems, they're removal problems. Yes, she looked at Ron sleeping. He was extraordinary tonight. Yes, Harry said, he was. I've been thinking of him as someone good to have around, Harry said without edge. That's not fair to him, she said. No, I'm going to be better about that. She said it with the same precision she applied to everything, like a commitment made to a formal record. I know, he said. She turned to look at him. In the moonlit quiet of the hospital wing, the Founder's magic was very present in both of them, the 4-part harmony of it moving slowly like breathing. What did you see in the mirror? She said. A pause, a kitchen table, people around it, the people the people I want. He paused again longer. You were there. She looked at him directly. She'd expected something like this, had been tracking the various threads of their connection with the same careful attention she gave everything, building toward a conclusion she hadn't quite let herself arrive at yet. As a friend, she said. As what we are, he said, which was neither more nor less than that, and she accepted it for the exact thing it was, an acknowledgement without a label, which was more honest than most things people said. What Voldemort said, she said. That you can't stop being afraid. I told him an object couldn't do it, Harry said. I didn't say it wasn't true. She looked at him. Are you afraid? Of some things, he said. Not of him, not anymore. He looked at Ron. What we did tonight, this is what the Founder's magic is for, not being invincible, being enough, whatever enough requires. She thought about this. What did Dumbledore say? He wants to talk. Harry leaned back in his chair. He knows now that we have a different understanding of the situation than he planned for. He's recalibrating. He'll be careful, she said. He'll try to understand how much we know before he decides what to tell us. Probably, Harry said. We should tell him everything we know, she said. He looked at her. All of it, she said. The Founder's magic, what we've worked out, Voldemort's nature, all of it. Not because he deserves it, but because operating with incomplete mutual information is less effective than operating with complete mutual information, and we need him effective. She paused. We just need him to understand that this runs in both directions. You want to negotiate with Dumbledore, Harry said. I want to establish a working relationship with Dumbledore, she said, based on accurate mutual disclosure rather than him managing us from above and us working around him from below. She paused. Yes, I want to negotiate with Dumbledore. Harry smiled, the real one, unguarded. He's not going to know what to do with you. Nobody knows what to do with me initially, she said. I'm working on it. Don't, he said. She looked at him. Don't work on it, he said. You're exactly what you should be. He said it with the same directness he said everything, no performance in it. And it landed in her chest in a way she didn't immediately have vocabulary for and filed away carefully for later examination. Thank you, she said a bit stiffly, because she was 11 and a half and receiving direct, genuine statements of value was still a skill she was developing. You're welcome, he said, unbothered. They sat in the silver hospital wing while the moonlight moved across the floor. Ron slept, the castle breathed. Somewhere above them, Dumbledore was thinking hard thoughts about revision and assumption and children who moved through ancient protections with the ease of people born to it. Below them, the third-floor corridor was quiet. The dog slept, the trapdoor was closed, the chambers were empty, the enchantments intact but purposeless, now guarding nothing, waiting to be dismantled. "Harry," she said. "We're going to have to do this again," she said. "Not this specifically, but versions of this. It's not over." "No," he said, "it's not. Voldemort will come back stronger next time. He'll find another way." "Yes," he was very calm about it. "That doesn't frighten you." "It focuses me," he said. "There's a difference." She thought about this. "I think I understand what the Founders intended now," she said slowly. The four of them, they weren't complementary in the sense of four different specialties making one complete skill set. They were complementary in a deeper sense. They pushed against each other, challenged each other. Gryffindor's instinct and Ravenclaw's architecture and Hufflepuff's steadiness and Slytherin's ruthless practicality. The tension between those things is where the real thinking happened. She looked at him. "We do that too." "We do," he agreed. "The stone taught me something," she said. "About the difference between containing a problem and solving it." "What did it teach you?" "That I was approaching this whole year as a containment problem," she said. "Understand the threat, manage it, minimize the damage, and you were approaching it as a removal problem, and both were right as far as they went, but the answer was synthesis. It was always synthesis." Harry turned his head to look at her. "You get there faster than anyone I've ever met." "You were already there," she said. "I was at the conclusion without the reasoning," he said. "You have the reasoning, that's not the same thing." She smiled at him, and it was the kind of smile that wasn't performed or managed or calibrated, just a real expression of something real in the silver midnight of a hospital wing where their friend was sleeping after extraordinary courage, and the world outside was cold and full of things that would need facing. "Get some sleep," he said. "Dumbledore will want to talk in the morning." "I have notes prepared," she said. "Of course you do," he said, and it was the warmest thing she'd heard all night. She leaned back in her chair, and the Founder's magic settled around them both, old and patient and quietly, thoroughly pleased. 3 days later, Harry sat across from Dumbledore in the headmaster's office, and Hermione sat beside him, and they told him everything. Dumbledore listened for 50 minutes without interruption, which was itself a statement. He listened and he looked at them, and something in his expression moved and shifted and settled differently with each thing they told him, and when they finished, he was quiet for a very long time. "The Founders combined magic," he said at last. "I had theories. About you, Harry. Your survival in 1981 was explicable in several ways, and the love magic hypothesis, while emotionally satisfying, was always somewhat incomplete as a mechanism." He looked at Hermione. "I had no theory that included you, Miss Granger. I should have." "Yes," Hermione said, "you should have." He looked at her over his half-moon glasses. Something in his expression was the ghost of a smile, the kind that was also self-reproach. "No," he said, "I don't suppose there's much use in gentle framing, is there?" "Not particularly," she said. "No," he folded his hands. "I owe you both a fuller account than I've given you. I'm going to give it to you now on the condition that we agree to this." He looked between them. "Mutual disclosure you mentioned. I will tell you what I know as I know it. In return, I ask that you tell me what you learn." "Not just what we learn," Harry said. "What we're planning." A pause. "Agreed," Dumbledore said. And Harry said, "When you're running a strategy that involves us as pieces on a board, you tell us, not after the fact, before." Another pause, longer, and in it the weight of many decades of operating otherwise made itself felt. Then Dumbledore said, "That is a harder agreement to make, not because I'm unwilling, but because old habits are genuinely resistant to revision." He looked at Harry directly. "I will try. I ask for your patience when I fail and your honesty when I do." Harry looked at him for a moment. "All right," he said. Dumbledore looked faintly surprised, as though he'd been braced for harder conditions. "You're not our enemy," Harry said. "You're also not our warden. That leaves a lot of room to work in." He paused. "Voldemort will come back. Whatever's left of him escaped through the castle walls. He's damaged and diminished, but he's not gone, and he'll look for another path to restoration." "Yes," Dumbledore said quietly. "Tell us everything you know about how he made himself hard to kill," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at them both. At the 11-year-old boy with his mother's eyes, and a quality of presence that had no business existing in someone that age. At the girl beside him with her careful, total attention, and a mind that was turning everything Dumbledore said into architecture even as he said it. He began to talk. Outside the windows, the first-year Christmas holidays had begun, and the castle was quiet and full of snow, and somewhere out in the wide world a dispersed and furious consciousness was finding its way toward the next strategy. But that was a problem for the future. Tonight in this office, with a fire and 3 cups of tea, the future was being prepared for carefully, honestly, by people who were finally telling each other the truth. Chapter 4, The Chamber Beneath Everything. The summer before second year lasted exactly as long as it needed to, and not a day longer. Harry spent 6 weeks of it in correspondence with Hermione, letters, real ones, sent by Hedwig, who treated the Oxford to Surrey route as a personal commute and had opinions about it, and 2 weeks of it in conversation with Dumbledore via Flu, which the Dursleys didn't know about because the fireplace in the front room had been quietly connected to the Flu network by someone Harry suspected was McGonagall. acting on instructions she'd received with a mixture of approval and significant reservation. The letters with Hermione were long and dense and covered variously. The historical record of Tom Riddle which Dumbledore had shared with them in the final days of term, 3 competing theories about the mechanism of soul fragmentation and its magical consequences, Hermione's summer reading list which was 14 books and growing, Harry's observations about the patterns of Muggle news that seemed to correlate with magical disturbances if you knew how to read the correlation, and occasionally, tucked into the margins or at the end in a different register. Something more personal, how the Dursleys were fine in the way of people who had been clearly told by Dumbledore that Harry was not to be mistreated, and had chosen compliance over confrontation, how Hermione's parents were adjusting to the reality of magic with the methodical thoroughness of people who approached everything methodically, how the Founders' magic felt different in summer, quieter, like something waiting for the acoustics of Hogwarts to come back. Hedwig, for her part, seemed to enjoy the letters from Hermione more than the ones from Ron, possibly because Hermione always included a brief note of appreciation for the owl specifically, addressed to Hedwig directly if she's amenable to being addressed, which Harry found quietly charming, and which Hedwig received with the dignity of someone whose quality is finally being recognized. He spent July in the library, the public one in Little Winging, which smelled of mildew and carpet cleaner, and had an excellent section on mythology that he'd been working through since he was 8 and reading and thinking about Horcruxes. Dumbledore hadn't used the word. He'd talked around it, described the concept in careful theoretical terms, mentioned the relevant magical text with the reluctance of someone who finds the subject genuinely distasteful rather than simply dangerous. But Harry had filled in the word himself from the shape of the description, because Slytherin's bequest included a working knowledge of dark magic as a category, not instructions, not a manual, but the kind of structural understanding you needed to recognize what you were looking at. Tom Riddle had made himself pieces, had split his soul and stored the pieces in objects, had made himself difficult to kill in the way that a fire is difficult to extinguish when you spread it across multiple sources of fuel. He told Hermione in a letter, carefully encoded, because he'd noticed that Hedwig occasionally arrived at the Granger house with his letters in a slightly different position than he'd sent them in, and he wasn't certain whose interest that served. She'd written back the next day faster than the distance should have permitted, which meant she'd started writing before Hedwig had technically arrived, which meant she'd felt the letter coming, which was a thing they'd quietly noted and added to the list of Founders' magic phenomena to examine further. The implication, her letter said, in the precise handwriting that compressed an enormous amount of thought into a small amount of space, is that there are multiple of them. He would not do this once. The psychology of it, the need for certainty, for control, for the absolute assurance of survival, is not satisfied by 1, 3 at minimum, I think more. I'm working on a mathematical model of optimal distribution that I'll bring to Hogwarts. Don't write back about this, too long to discuss by letter. September, he'd written back in the margin of her letter and sent it back with Hedwig. He thought about Tom Riddle a great deal that summer. Not with fear, the fear had stopped somewhere in the mirror room, looking into that cold and ancient face and finding it comprehensible. He thought about him the way he thought about problems he intended to solve, from every angle patiently without the distortion of emotion but without pretending the emotion wasn't there. Tom Riddle had been unloved and had decided that love was a vulnerability rather than something he'd been denied, had built an entire cosmology around that decision. Had hurt an incalculable number of people in defense of a conclusion he'd arrived at when he was a child in an orphanage who didn't understand why the world felt like it was made for everyone but him. Harry understood the feeling. He didn't share the conclusion. That was the whole difference, he thought, sitting in the Little Winging library on a Tuesday afternoon in August with a book about Norse mythology open in front of him and Hedwig sleeping in his bag in a way that was technically against library rules. The feeling was comprehensible. The conclusion was a choice. And between the feeling and the choice was everything, every person, every possibility, every version of yourself you could become. He closed the mythology book and wrote 3 more pages of Horcrux theory in his notebook and caught the bus home for dinner. September 1st arrived with the particular quality of a door opening. He saw Hermione on the platform before she saw him. She was coming through the barrier with her parents on either side of her father carrying her trunk on a trolley, her mother saying something that made Hermione make a face that was half exasperated and half fond. She was wearing a green jumper and her hair was, if anything, more spectacular than he remembered, and she had her purple notebook tucked under her arm with the proprietary firmness of someone who has spent a summer filling it. She saw him across the platform and the crowd between them didn't matter. She crossed to him and said, "I have 14 new theorems," by way of hello. "Good summer," he said. "Productive." She looked at him with the inventory taking attention. "You've been thinking about the Horcruxes?" "Constantly," he said. "Me too." She fell into step beside him toward the train. "There's something we need to find first. A diary. I think he made the first one early before the others, possibly at school. It would have the highest concentration of the original personality because it was made when he was youngest. She was already walking with the focused energy of someone who has a great deal to do and insufficient time to do it. I found a reference in Dark Magic and its Relics, a diary passed through wizarding hands in the 60s that exhibited unusual behavior. I have a theory about where it ended up. Tell me on the train, he said. I have notes, she said. I assumed, he said. She smiled at him, quick and genuine, and he smiled back, and the platform noise and the steam and the red engine were all around them, and it was unmistakably good to be back. They found Ron and Neville in the usual compartment. Ron had claimed it 40 minutes early, which was the kind of territorial chess player logic that made perfect sense once you understood how Ron organized his priorities. He looked better for the summer, more comfortable in himself, the particular confidence that had emerged in the chess chamber having had time to settle in. He'd written to Harry 5 times, always about Quidditch or chess or things that had happened at the Burrow, and the letters had been warm and funny and entirely Ron. He'd written to Hermione twice, which she'd mentioned to Harry with the observation that this was precisely twice more than she'd expected, and that she'd written back both times, and that their correspondence had the quality of two people who have discovered they genuinely like each other and are both slightly surprised about it. Neville arrived with a plant, a small, self-contained thing in a clay pot that he introduced as a fanged geranium, and asked if anyone minded if it sat in the compartment, because it needed company on long journeys. Nobody minded. The fanged geranium bit Ron once briefly, and he and Neville had a 10-minute conversation about deterrence techniques that was the most Neville had talked in one go since Harry had known him. They were half an hour from Hogwarts when the compartment door opened and a small girl with red hair appeared in the gap. Harry recognized her immediately, not from meeting her because he hadn't, but from the way she looked at him, which was a very specific combination of shyness and intensity that told him he was something she'd thought about more than was comfortable for her. "Sorry," she said, to the compartment in general. "All the other," she glanced at Harry and went red and looked at her shoes. "All the others are full, I can find somewhere else." "Sit down," Harry said kindly and directly because there was no point in the alternative. "We've got room." She sat down very carefully next to Neville, and Neville said, "I'm Neville," and held out his hand with the social directness that he occasionally achieved when he forgot to be nervous. "Ginny," she said, shaking it. "Ginny Weasley." Ron made a sound that was a specific combination of "oh" and "of course" and slightly fatalistic. "He's your brother," Hermione said, meaning Ron. "6 of them," Ginny said. "3 of them are at school, it's a lot." "It sounds it," Harry said. She looked at him properly then, the intense shyness still there but being overridden by something more genuine. "You're Harry Potter," she said. "Yes," he said. "Sorry, I know that's my mum talks about you and—" "I don't mind," he said. "What's your mum like?" That surprised her. She'd been prepared, Harry thought, for the famous person routine, prepared either to gush or to overcompensate for gushing, and a genuine question about a genuine person was not what she'd had a script for. She thought about it. "Loud," she said, "and warm. She worries a lot, but she worries because she's just very—" She made a gesture that encompassed something more than words. "She loves you," Neville said simply. "Yes," Ginny said, and her voice had something in it that was both grateful and slightly wistful. Hermione was watching Ginny with the careful attention she gave people she was still cataloguing. "First year," she said. "Yes, the sorting is fine," Hermione said. "The hat talks to you a bit, don't let it startle you." Ginny looked at her. "Did it talk a lot to you?" "A fair amount," Hermione said. "Me too," Harry said. "It's just working out where you fit." "What if I don't fit anywhere?" Ginny said with the frankness of someone who's been worrying about something for a long time and is too tired to keep managing the expression of it. "You'll fit," Harry said. "The castle knows where people belong." She looked at him again with that particular quality, seeing him, really seeing him, past the name and the scar and the weight of other people's narratives about him. He found he didn't mind being seen that way. It was refreshing, actually. "You're not what I thought you'd be," she said. "Nobody is," he said. She smiled at that, a real one, bright and slightly crooked, that transformed her face into something that had nothing to do with shyness. Harry thought, she's going to be extraordinary. He was right. He just didn't know yet what form it would take. The first odd thing happened on September 3rd. Harry noticed it because he noticed most things, a smell in the corridor near the second-floor bathroom, something old and cold, and faintly wrong that his founder's enhanced senses flagged with the same register as Quirrell the previous year, but different. Not a presence inside a person, a presence inside an object. He stood in the corridor and breathed it in and turned slowly until he had the direction. The smell was coming from the Gryffindor common room. Or more specifically, from a trunk that had arrived on the train and was now sitting in the second-year boys' dormitory. He tracked it that far and then stopped, because it wasn't his trunk to open and it wasn't his information to act on without more to go on. He told Hermione at breakfast. "The diary," she said, setting down her pumpkin juice with a careful precision that meant she was reframing things rapidly. "I told you I had a theory about where it ended up. The reference I found suggested it passed through the hands of a family with old money and old connections, the kind who'd consider it a trophy or a tool." She was very still. "Lucius Malfoy." Harry looked across the great hall to the Slytherin table. Draco Malfoy was eating with the particular self-possession he projected at all times, the armor of someone who has never existed without status and can't imagine what he'd be without it. "He gave it to someone on the train," Harry said. Or had it planted? He thought about it. Ginny, Hermione looked at him sharply. She came into our compartment because the others were full, he said. Were they actually full? A brief silence. I don't know, she said. If someone wanted to get the diary to first-year Gryffindor and have it look incidental, he left it there. That's speculation, she said. We need more. We need to talk to Ginny, he said, without making her think she's in trouble. She'll shut down if she thinks she's in trouble. Hermione looked at him. How do you know that? I watched her all through the sorting, he said. She's braver than she thinks she is, but she has a particular fear of being seen as the problem, not getting things wrong being the problem. There's a difference. Hermione was quiet for a moment. You're good at reading people, she said. It wasn't quite a compliment, more of a noting, an acknowledgement that went into the permanent record. People make sense to me, he said, the same way magical theory makes sense to you. He paused. Between us we cover most of the relevant ground. Don't be smug about it, she said, but there was no heat in it. I'm never smug, he said, I'm just accurate. She threw a piece of toast at him. They found Ginny on the second afternoon, in a corridor on the third floor, sitting against the wall with her knees pulled up, and an expression on her face that was the expression of someone trying very hard to feel fine about something they don't feel fine about. She had a notebook in her lap. Not her own, her school notebooks were blue. This one was black and old, and had Tom Marvolo Riddle written on the inside cover in old-fashioned ink, and she was writing in it with a quill and the absorbed attention of someone in the middle of a conversation. Harry sat down beside her. Hermione sat down on her other side. Ginny looked up startled and closed the notebook with a speed that was trying to be casual and wasn't. Oh, hi. She looked between them with the slightly hunted expression of someone discovered doing something they're not sure they should be doing. That's an interesting notebook, Harry said. It's just a diary, Ginny said, too fast. Can I see it? Her hands tightened on it. It's private. He didn't push. Ginny, he said, do you know where it came from? She hesitated. Someone slipped it into my cauldron in Diagon Alley. She stopped. I thought maybe it was. I thought it was nice, someone giving me something, and it was mostly empty, so I started writing in it, and then another stopped longer. It writes back, she said finally, and her voice had something in it that was both excited and frightened, the combination of feelings you got when something impossible was happening to you and you didn't know if you're special or in danger. It writes back, Harry said, without alarm in his voice, because alarm would close her down. What does it say? Nice things, she said. Mostly it's. She looked at the notebook. It knows a lot about everything and it listens. She was very quiet for a moment. I don't have a lot of people who just listen. I know, Harry said, and then carefully, what does it ask you? She blinked. It doesn't. She stopped, and he watched her actually think about it, really think about it for what was possibly the first time. It asks about the school, she said slowly. A lot. It asks about the castle, where things are, what's happening, who, her voice went strange, who Harry Potter is like in real life. Ginny, Hermione said, quiet and direct, I need you to not write in it again, not until we've looked at it. Can you do that? Ginny looked at her. Why? Because something that writes back from inside a notebook isn't a friend, Hermione said, and the things it's been asking you about are specific enough to suggest it has a plan, and you deserve to know what the plan is before you keep helping it. Ginny was very still. Harry watched her process this, the movement behind her eyes, the slight rearrangement of what she'd been telling herself this was. She was not a stupid girl. She'd been a lonely one, and loneliness made people available to things that offered comfort, and the diary had offered comfort in the way that something designed to exploit you offers comfort, perfectly specifically in exactly the shape of the absence it was filling. She handed Harry the diary. He took it and felt what was inside it, not quite a presence, not the cold double signature of Quirrell in the previous year, but something adjacent, a fragment, an echo. Something that was unmistakably Tom Riddle and was unmistakably incomplete and was unmistakably aware of being held, because the moment Harry's hands closed around it, the magic in it contracted the way a pupil contracts in bright light. He looked at Hermione. She was feeling it too. Her hand had come up slightly instinctively as though she were about to check a temperature. How do we destroy it? She said quietly, not to Ginny. Basilisk venom, he said, or fiend fire. Either would work on a Horcrux. We don't have access to either, she said. We know where a basilisk lives, he said. She looked at him. The Chamber of Secrets, he said. The legend's real. There's a chamber below the school, access through Slytherin's original construction. I've been feeling the edges of it since we got back. He paused. And I can hear it. Hear what? Ginny said. They'd almost forgotten she was there, almost. Something large and very old living below us, Harry said to her directly, because she deserved the direct account. A basilisk, Salazar Slytherin's legacy, not the violent part, or not only that. The basilisk was meant to be a guardian, I think. It's been down there 1,000 years, and the magic maintaining it is founder level, which means it's not entirely what it was when it went in. You can talk to it, Hermione said. Parseltongue. Salazar's bequest, Harry said. Yes. You want to go down there, she said. I want to understand what's down there before whoever opened the chamber last time tries again, he said. Who opened it before? Ginny said. Harry looked at her steadily. Tom Riddle, he said, when he was a student 50 years ago. She absorbed this, went slightly pale, looked at the diary in his hands. He told me he was good, she said. In the diary, that he was misunderstood, that the chamber was. She stopped. He was using me to find it again. Yes, Harry said. Was any of it? She stopped again, and now the expression on her face was the specific hurt of having trusted something that turned out to be untrustworthy, which was a particular kind of wound. Was any of it real? What you felt was real, Harry said. The loneliness that made you available to it, that's real and it matters. What responded to it wasn't. He paused. That's not your fault. She looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said, and there was a lot in the word, a processing, a deciding, a gathering of herself back into herself. What do I need to do? Tell no one what you told us, Hermione said. Not yet. Go back to your dormitory, eat dinner, be normal. Can you do that? Yes, Ginny said with a certainty that confirmed Harry's first assessment of her. She was braver than she knew. She left. Harry held the diary and looked at Hermione, and they were both quiet for a moment. Tonight. She said. Tonight, he said. They went alone. This was deliberate, and Hermione had argued against it until Harry had explained his reasoning, which was that Ron and Neville had already risked themselves once for something that was ultimately Harry's fight, and this one was more dangerous, and he wasn't going to ask people to walk into unknown territory with a basilisk in it unless he'd first established that the territory could be survived. That's a good reason, she'd said. I know. It doesn't mean I agree with it. I know that too. I'm coming, she said, and he'd known she would be because this was how they worked. He drew the line, she argued the line's placement, and the line ended up somewhere better than either of them had started. The entrance to the chamber was in the second-floor girls' bathroom, which had been out of order since the start of term in a way that the school's institutional inertia had apparently decided required no investigation. Moaning Myrtle haunted it with the particular dedication of someone who has chosen their tragedy as their identity and declines to be argued out of it. Harry had been in twice to examine it, and had identified the sink with the tiny snake engraved on the tap and the parcel tongue lock. He opened it now, standing in the girls' bathroom at 11 at night with Hermione beside him, and the floor split and the pipe opened and the drop below was dark and smelled of old water and stone and something that was very distinctly alive. They went in. The slide deposited them in a long tunnel. Bones, old ones, crunched under their feet. Their wand lights made the dark into a moving thing, shadows shifting at the edges. Harry could hear the basilisk, not the breathing exactly, more the vast and patient presence of something enormous in a contained space, like hearing the ocean through a wall. Stay behind me, he said. I'll be beside you, she said. He didn't argue because he'd lost that argument 3 seconds ago. They moved through the tunnel until the stone door carved with serpents that writhed in the wandlight, beautiful and cold, and Harry said something to it in parcel tongue, feeling the sound move through him in a way that wasn't quite voluntary, the Slytherin bequest operating through him like a language half-remembered from childhood. The door opened. The Chamber of Secrets was vast in a way that was more felt than seen, the ceiling too high for their wandlight to reach, the columns stretching into darkness, the carved stone green with moisture and age, and at the far end of the column-lined aisle, a carved stone face that was unmistakably Salazar Slytherin, severe and intelligent and 1,000 years old. And in the water that covered the floor, curled in loops that were each as wide as a corridor, something moved. Close your eyes, Harry said quietly, and Hermione did, immediately and without question, because they'd discussed the basilisk's method of killing, and she'd calculated the necessary precautions before they'd left. Harry looked at the basilisk. It was vast. It was old in a way that had moved past old into something else, something geological, a creature that had existed so long it had become more like a feature of the landscape than an animal. Its scales were dull in places where the centuries had worn the brightness from them, and its eyes, he didn't meet its eyes. He looked at the space beside them, slightly to the left, the way you'd look slightly to the side of something bright to see it without being blinded. He spoke to it in parcel tongue, not an attack, not a command. He spoke the way he'd spoken to the boa constrictor in the zoo at age 10, the way he'd always spoken to things that were living and aware, like they had something to say. You have been here a long time, he said. The basilisk's head turned toward him. Something moved in its expression which seemed impossible because it was a snake, but Godric and Salazar had apparently between them built into Harry's perception the ability to read animal intention, because he could see the assessment in it, the ancient and patient evaluation of the thing in front of it. Long, it said, not a word exactly, an impression. Parseltongue was more sensation than language at the edges, he'd found. You were a guardian, he said, not a weapon. You were meant to keep something safe. A pause that felt like the turning of geological time. Was it said, then other, used, made to harm? Tom Riddle, Harry said. The basilisk's presence contracted in a way that registered as something between pain and anger, as much as those could be ascribed to something that old and that inhuman. A piece of him is here, Harry said, in an object. I need to destroy it. You are the heir, the basilisk said, and it said it not in the aggressive, territorial way of something defending rights, but in the way of something that has been waiting for a long time for whoever was supposed to come and is confirming the identification. I carry Salazar's bequest, Harry said, and the others, all four. Another pause. All four, it said, and the quality of its presence changed, the patience of it, the containment, something releasing, like a held breath let out. Will you give me a fang? Harry said. The basilisk was still for a long time. Then it opened its mouth, vast and dark and smelling of something older than the stone, and one enormous curved fang separated from the row and fell with a sound like a blade into the water. Harry picked it up. It was warm, the heat of the living body it had come from still in it, and the venom on the tip was dark gold and the most dangerous substance produced by any living thing in Britain. "Thank you," he said. "Finish it," the basilisk said, "and then I am done. 1,000 years is enough." Harry looked at the creature. He understood suddenly and completely what it was asking. After he said, "I'll come back after and I'll release you properly, not just leave you here." The basilisk's head lowered slightly. It coiled back into its loops. The audience was over. Harry turned, and Hermione was standing behind him with her eyes still closed and her face wearing an expression of someone holding very still through something they very much want to see. "You can open your eyes," he said. "It's looked away." She opened her eyes, took in the chamber, the columns, the vast ceiling, the stone face at the end, the water, the enormous coiled presence of the basilisk with its head down and its eyes not toward them. "What did it say?" she asked. He told her all of it. She listened, and when he finished, she looked at the fang in his hand and at the diary in his jacket pocket, and she said, "It wants to die. It's been here for 1,000 years, he said. "That's long enough. You told it you'd come back." "I will." She looked at him. "Harry, I know what I said," he told her gently. "I keep my promises." She held his gaze for a moment, and in the vast cold chamber with the basilisk breathing at the far end like a tide, something passed between them that was the Founder's magic and also something more personal, something that didn't have a category yet. He pressed the basilisk fang into the cover of the diary. The reaction was immediate and violent, black ink pouring from the puncture like a wound, the object screaming in a register below sound but above feeling, the magic in it contracting and fighting, and then coming apart in the way of something that never anticipated being destroyed, because it had built its entire architecture on the assumption of its own permanence. Tom Riddle's fragment of soul came apart. Hermione stood beside him in the chamber and watched it go, and it took longer than he expected and was uglier than he'd wanted, and when it was finished, he was holding a scorched and empty notebook and the chamber was several degrees colder. "One," she said quietly. "One," he agreed. They looked at each other. Word contained everything, the vast patience it implied, the long work ahead, the specific determination of two people who have just done the first small part of an enormous thing and are measuring the distance, remaining not with despair but with focus. "We need to tell Dumbledore," she said. "We need to tell Dumbledore about the Horcrux," he agreed. "And we need to find the others before we tell anyone else anything." "The diary was Malfoy's," she said. "Lucius Malfoy gave it to Ginny." "Intentionally," he said, "which means he knew what it was, which means he's complicit in Voldemort's strategy, which means—" "The school board," she said. "He has influence over the school board. He could use this to move against Dumbledore." She was working it out quickly. He wanted the chamber opened, wanted something to happen that he could blame on certain kinds of students probably, and then use the chaos to remove Dumbledore, Harry said, and install someone more manageable. They stood in the Chamber of Secrets, water around their ankles, the basilisk breathing in the dark, and worked out Lucius Malfoy's plan with the efficiency of people who have been thinking about power structures since they were 11. "What do we do about him?" she said. "We document everything," Harry said. "The diary, Ginny's account of receiving it, the magical evidence of what was inside it. Then we present it." He paused. "Dumbledore needs to see this tonight. And Ginny comes with us," he said. "She's a witness, not a victim. The distinction matters." Hermione looked at him for a moment. Yes, that's right." She paused. "She'll need to be there when we confront Lucius Malfoy." "You think that's a good idea?" "I think it's her right," she said. "He used her. She should be in the room when he has to account for it." He thought about this. "All right," he said. They made their way back through the chamber, past the basilisk whose breathing didn't change but whose presence acknowledged them as they passed. A subtle thing, directional, the attention of something very old turning toward and then releasing them. Harry paused at the door. "I'll come back," he said in Parseltongue. The water in the chamber moved in a pattern that might have been wind and wasn't. They climbed back out through the pipe, back into the cold bathroom where Myrtle was watching them from her U-bend with the expression of someone who has just witnessed something interesting and is profoundly annoyed about not being able to tell anyone. "What?" Myrtle started. "The chamber is closed," Harry said. "Whatever's been happening this term, it's done." He looked at her with the direct attention he gave everyone. "Thank you for being here. You've been keeping this bathroom out of order for 50 years, and I don't think that was an accident." Myrtle blinked. She opened her mouth, closed it again. "Tom," she started. "He used you too," Harry said, "the same way he used everyone." Something in Myrtle's face went through a long sequence of changes that had the quality of someone revising a narrative they'd been living in for so long it had become furniture. "Oh," she said, finally. "Yeah," Harry said. They left the bathroom. The corridor was empty and quiet, torches burning low, the castle breathing around them. "Tom Riddle," Hermione said as they walked, "destroyed everything he touched." "Yes," Harry said, "and people still thought of him as exceptional." "He was exceptional," Harry said. "The exceptional and the good aren't the same thing." She walked beside him in silence for a moment. "Did it feel like anything when the Horcrux went? Like something wrong being corrected?" he said. "The same as in the mirror room." He paused, "but bigger. He'd put more of himself in it." "How much of himself is left?" she said, thinking about Horcrux numbers, about the mathematical model she'd been building. "Enough to be dangerous," he said, "not enough to be what he was." He paused. "We'll find the rest." Yes, she said with the certainty of someone who has made a decision not to be afraid of the work. We will. Dumbledore's office was lit and warm at midnight, which told Harry that Dumbledore had been waiting not necessarily for them specifically, but in the general way of someone who understood that significant events tended to resolve themselves at midnight and positioned himself accordingly. He looked at the scorched diary on his desk. He looked at Harry and Hermione. He looked at Ginny Weasley, who stood between them with her shoulders back in the specific way of someone who has decided to be braver than they feel, and something in his expression moved that was more than professional concern. "Ginny," he said very gently, "are you all right?" She started and stopped. "I will be," she said, which was more precise and more admirable than yes. "Yes," Dumbledore said, "I rather think you will." He looked at the diary again. This was a Horcrux. "Yes," Harry said, "and you destroyed it with basilisk venom." "From the basilisk itself," Hermione said. "We spoke with it." "You spoke with—" He stopped, a pause, he picked up his tea, put it down. "You went into the chamber." "The chamber is safe now," Harry said. "The basilisk is contained and cooperative. The Horcrux is gone." He paused. "We need to discuss Lucius Malfoy." "Yes," Dumbledore said, "we do." He looked at Ginny one more time. "Miss Weasley, I'm going to have Madame Pomfrey check you over, purely precautionary, and then I'll send word to your parents. Professor McGonagall will sit with you." He caught Ginny's expression. "You've done nothing wrong tonight. You've been extraordinarily brave. Everything that follows from here is straightforward." "Is it?" Ginny said. "It is," Harry said to her directly because she was looking at him and not at Dumbledore. "You gave us the diary. You told us the truth. That's all you needed to do." He paused. "The rest of it is our problem." She looked at him for a long moment with those direct brown eyes. "He's going to say it was an accident," she said. "Lucius Malfoy, he's going to say he didn't know what it was." "Probably," Harry said, "and people will believe him because he's wealthy and connected and accustomed to being believed," Hermione said. "Yes. Which is why we've already documented the chain of evidence and the magical signature of the Horcrux in a way that doesn't require his confession." She glanced at Harry. "I did that while you were in the tunnel. I prepared 3 copies. Ginny looked at Hermione. "When did you?" "On the way here," Hermione said. "I multitask." Ginny, despite everything, laughed, a real one, startled out of her, and McGonagall arrived at that moment, assessed the room in 4 seconds flat, said, "Come with me, Miss Weasley," and steered Ginny out with the brisk authority of someone who has handled crises for 38 years and has not yet run out of competence. Harry and Hermione sat down across from Dumbledore. "The diary was the second Horcrux," Harry said. "We believe there are at least 4 more." Dumbledore looked at him. "You've been working on this since last term." "Since the mirror room," Harry said. "When you told us about Riddle's history, I had enough to build a working hypothesis." He glanced at Hermione. "We both did." "How many do you believe there are in total?" Dumbledore asked. 6 objects, Hermione said. "Possibly 7. He would want a significant number, not arbitrarily significant but meaningful. 7 is the most magically powerful number. He would have aimed for 7. She paused, "But making them would have cost him each time, cost his soul, which means each one diminished him, and by the end what he actually achieved was probably less than what he wanted." Dumbledore was very quiet for a moment. "You've arrived at conclusions that took me years," he said, "and there was no false modesty in it. It was simply factual and accounting. And I had resources you don't." "We have resources you don't either," Harry said evenly. "Yes," Dumbledore said, "I'm aware." "The basilisk," Harry said. "I told it I'd come back. After the Horcruxes are dealt with, I'm going to go back to the chamber and release it, properly." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "I need you to know that's the plan." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "The basilisk has been in that chamber for 1,000 years," he said. "A creature of that age with a consciousness that old deserves to not be imprisoned anymore," Harry said. "I promised." Another pause. "All right," Dumbledore said, "and it had the quality of a man recognizing the shape of a particular kind of moral certainty and choosing not to argue with it." "All right. Lucius Malfoy," Hermione said, because the Malfoy problem was time-sensitive and she knew it. "First thing tomorrow," Dumbledore said. "He's on the school board. I cannot summon him at midnight without either causing significant political friction or giving him time to prepare a defense. But tomorrow morning with the evidence you've prepared," he looked at Hermione. 3 copies, you said. "1 for you, 1 for the Ministry's Magical Law Enforcement Office, 1 kept with a third party of our choosing," she said. "Who is your third party?" "Professor McGonagall," she said. He looked at her. "You trust Minerva?" "Implicitly," she said. He looked slightly pained. "As do I," he said. "Very well. There is one more thing," Harry said. "Draco Malfoy." Dumbledore waited. "Doesn't know," Harry said. "What his father did, I'm as sure of that as I can be without asking him directly." He paused. "I'm going to ask him directly, Harry, not to accuse him, to give him the information his father withheld from him." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "He's going to find out that Lucius is in trouble. He should find out what Lucius actually did rather than whatever version his father will have prepared for him." Dumbledore was quiet for a very long time. "That's either extraordinarily kind or extraordinarily strategic," he said finally. "Both," Hermione said. "Both," Harry confirmed. The conversation with Lucius Malfoy happened in Dumbledore's office the next morning, with Harry and Hermione present because they'd asked to be and Dumbledore had agreed, and with Ginny present because she'd asked and Harry had said yes. Lucius Malfoy was a tall man with long blonde hair and the practiced ease of someone who has been the most important person in every room he's entered for 40 years. And he walked into Dumbledore's office with that ease intact, and looked at the scorched diary on the desk, and at Harry and Hermione and Ginny, and kept the ease in place for approximately 4 seconds. Then he looked at Ginny's face, and Harry watched the calculation happen, saw him understand that whatever narrative he'd been preparing, the girl's presence in the room complicated it. "Mr. Malfoy," Dumbledore said, "thank you for coming." "Headmaster," Lucius said, "I'm sure there's been some—" "This is yours," Harry said. He put the scorched diary on the desk in front of Lucius and watched him look at it. The ease was still in place, but something behind the eyes had done a rapid recalculation. "I don't believe I've seen that before," Lucius said. "It was in Miss Weasley's cauldron," Harry said. "Placed there in Diagon Alley, it contained a fragment of Voldemort's soul." He said it the way he said everything, directly, without flinching, without performance. "We destroyed it last night." Lucius's gaze moved to him with the slow and deliberate quality of someone choosing carefully between several responses. "That's a very serious accusation, Mr. Potter." "It's a description of events," Harry said. "The accusation is that you knew what was in it when you put it in her cauldron." "I did no such, Mr. Malfoy," Hermione said, and there was something in her voice that was very calm and very final, like a door closing. "I've documented the magical signature of the Horcrux contained within that diary. I've documented Miss Weasley's account of receiving it. I've cross-referenced the signature with records of objects that passed through your family's possession in the past 5 years, and the match is definitive. We have 3 copies of this documentation in 3 separate locations." She paused. "I'm 12 years old. The documentation I produced in 40 minutes last night will survive any legal challenge you can mount, and I am confident of this because I built it specifically to do so." Lucius looked at her. "Furthermore," she continued, "the diary was used to influence a first-year student with the intent of reopening the Chamber of Secrets. This is not a political matter or a matter of interpretation. It is a criminal matter." She folded her hands on her knee. "You should speak to your legal counsel before you say anything else." The room was very quiet. Lucius looked from Hermione to Harry to Dumbledore to Ginny. Ginny was looking at him with the steady gaze of someone who has been afraid of something and has decided to stop. "It was the most frightening thing in the room, probably," he said at last. "This isn't over." "No," Harry said, "it's not, but today's part of it is." He paused. "And you should know I spoke to your son this morning." He watched the calculation behind Lucius's eyes accelerate. "I told him what his father actually did, not what you would have told him, what actually happened." A very long pause. "He deserved to know," Harry said. "He can make his own choices about what to do with it." Something happened in Lucius Malfoy's face that was more complicated than Harry had expected, not anger or not only anger. Something beneath it that was, if you read it carefully, closer to shame. Not for Ginny, not for the diary, not for Voldemort's strategy, for his son knowing, for Draco specifically being in possession of this information. It passed quickly. The practiced ease came back, but Harry had seen it and he filed it away carefully because it was information about what Lucius Malfoy was actually afraid of, and that was always the most useful information to have. Draco Malfoy had said when Harry came to find him that morning, exactly 3 words before Harry said anything. "You know something?" "Yes," Harry said. "Can we talk?" The conversation happened in an empty classroom on the 6th floor, 10 minutes before the Lucius Malfoy meeting, and Harry told Draco everything relevant: the diary, Ginny, the Horcrux, Lucius's role in it. He told it straight without either shielding Draco from the difficult parts or weaponizing the difficult parts. Draco didn't say anything for a long time. He'd say he was doing it for the cause, he said finally. "Probably," Harry said. "He'd say it was necessary." His voice was flat in the way of someone controlling something very tightly. "Probably," Harry said again. Draco looked at him. "Why are you telling me?" "Because you're not your father," Harry said, "and you'd rather know than not know." Draco was very still for a moment. "You don't know that. I know you've been trying to work out what kind of person you are since September," Harry said. "That's not something people do when they're comfortable with the answers they already have." A silence. Draco looked at the window. His profile was very sharp in the light. "He's going to be in trouble," he said, "isn't he?" "Yes." "Will he?" "Azkaban is unlikely," Harry said. "He'll have legal representation and political capital, and the ministry is complicated, but the school board position is finished and there will be formal consequences." Draco nodded once, very small, the kind of nod that's more a processing mechanism than an agreement. "Draco," Harry said. He looked at Harry. "The choices you make from here are yours," Harry said, "not his. Whatever he built, whatever expectations you've been living inside, those are his, not yours." Draco looked at him for a long moment with the expression he usually wore around Harry, the one that was trying to be contempt and kept becoming something more complicated. "You're very strange, Potter," he said. "So I've heard," Harry said. Something moved in Draco's face that might, with better circumstances and more time, develop into the beginnings of a different kind of expression altogether. Then it closed off and he stood up and he said, "Don't expect gratitude." "I wasn't," Harry said. Draco left. Harry sat in the empty classroom for a moment and listened to the castle, which was doing the thing it sometimes did when something had gone the way it needed to go, a settling, a warmth, an almost subliminal approval. He went to meet Hermione outside Dumbledore's office. She was already there, documentation organized, expression composed, ready. She looked at him as he approached, and he must have had something in his face that communicated how the conversation had gone, because she said, "Was it the right call?" "Yes," he said. "How did he take it?" "Like someone who needed to hear it and wasn't ready to admit that," he said. She nodded. "Neville left food outside his dormitory door," she said. "He noticed Draco looking rough this morning and didn't know why but left food anyway." Harry looked at her. "I know," she said. "Neville's extraordinary." "Yes," Harry said. "He is." The door to the office opened and Dumbledore looked out. "Ready," he said. "Ready," they said both at once and went in. The evening after was quiet by comparison. Ginny found them in the common room after dinner, navigated through the older students with a directness that was new, and sat in the armchair across from Harry and Hermione and Ron and Neville, who had accumulated around the fire in the way they developed, comfortable and specific. "Thank you," she said, to Harry and Hermione, but to the group, "all of you. You did the hard part," Harry said. "I didn't," she said. "You went into the chamber." "You gave us the diary when you didn't have to," Hermione said. "That was the hardest part, the rest was just following the evidence." "Just," Ron said. "Relatively speaking," Hermione said. Ginny looked around the group, at Ron, who was her brother and had turned out to be more than that today, at Neville, who had left food outside a Slytherin's dormitory door because he noticed someone was struggling, at Hermione, who had built legal documentation in 40 minutes at midnight, at Harry, who had spoken to a 1,000-year-old basilisk and asked for a favor. Is it all right if I sit here?" she said. "Not tonight specifically, in general." "Obviously," Harry said. She settled into the armchair with the specific ease of someone who has found somewhere they didn't know they were looking for. The fire was warm, the castle was quiet. The Founders' magic moved through Harry and Hermione in the four-part pattern that had become so familiar it was indistinguishable now from breathing, just a part of what they were, all of them, in this room. "What happens next?" Ginny said. "We go to classes," Harry said. "We do the work. We find the rest of what Voldemort left behind." He paused. "And we take care of each other." "Simple," Ginny said. "Mostly," he said. She laughed and the fire crackled, and outside the tower windows Scotland was dark and magnificent and indifferent to human plans, and 5 children in a common room were doing the ancient and specific work of becoming people who could bear what was coming. Chapter 5, The Shape of War. The Dementor got on the train at the border crossing into Scotland, and Harry felt it before anyone else did. He'd been playing chess with Ron, losing, which Ron was generous enough not to make a thing of when the temperature dropped. Not gradually, not the way a compartment cooled when clouds covered the sun, but immediately, comprehensively, like walking into a room where something had been draining the warmth out of the air for a long time and had finally gotten thorough about it. Hermione looked up from her book. Harry was already on his feet. The compartment door slid open by itself, and the Dementor filled it, tall and robed and wrong in a way that no other wrongness quite matched, the wrongness of something that was alive but had never been warm, that moved through the world by taking rather than giving. Harry felt its presence land on the Founder's magic in his chest, and the magic reacted the way it always reacted to active threats, quietly, completely, coming fully present. He heard his mother's voice. He always heard his mother's voice near Dementors. He'd accepted this the way he'd accepted all the strange inheritances of his life, as information, as something that mattered, as a reason to act rather than a reason to stop. He raised his wand. "Harry," Hermione started. "Expecto Patronum." The stag burst from his wand, with the force of something that had been waiting for the right moment, silver-white and enormous, and more solid than any Patronus he'd seen in the theoretical texts. A living thing made of light that moved between Harry and the Dementor with its head lowered, and its hooves planted with the absolute certainty of something that has never once considered retreating. The Dementor went backward. Not calmly, with the speed of something that has encountered a force it wasn't prepared for, through the compartment door and gone, the cold going with it in a rush that left the air feeling scrubbed. The stag stood in the compartment doorway for 3 more seconds and then dissolved. Silence. Ron said, "That was a full Patronus." "Yes," Harry said. "You're 13, Ron said. "I'm aware." "A full corporeal." "Ron," Hermione said. "Let him sit down first." Harry sat down. The aftermath of Dementor proximity was a cold that went deeper than temperature, into the bones, into the psyche, a flat grey feeling that had nothing to do with the present moment and everything to do with the worst memories hitting the surface all at once. He worked through it the way he'd learned to work through the bad feeling under the cupboard at the Dursleys, methodically, with the recognition that it was temporary, that it was a state rather than a fact. Hermione sat down beside him instead of across, which wasn't where she usually sat. She didn't say anything. Her shoulder was warm against his, and the warmth was more useful than words would have been. "There shouldn't be Dementors on the train," Neville said with the quiet precision of someone who is frightened and is choosing to be angry about it instead. "They're supposed to stay near the school." "Fudge authorized an expanded patrol," Hermione said. "I read the ministry memo that was in the Prophet last week. Expanded patrol in connection with the escaped prisoner." She paused. "Sirius Black." The name moved through the compartment differently than other names. Ron knew it. His expression shifted into something cautious. Neville knew it. Ginny, who joined them at King's Cross and was tucked into the corner with her trunk, looked at Harry specifically when the name was said. Harry looked at the space where the Dementor had been, Sirius Black. His godfather. He'd spent the summer reading everything he could find about the man, 12 muggles, one magical, one spell, street full of witnesses, no trial, the entry in great wizarding events of the 20th century said, which was the kind of summary that told you the facts and nothing about the facts. He'd asked Dumbledore in one of their flu conversations, and Dumbledore had told him what he knew, that Sirius Black had been his parents' closest friend, secret keeper, suspected betrayer, prisoner for 12 years. Harry had sat with this information all summer. He'd also noticed that Dumbledore telling it had the quality of someone reciting a conclusion they'd reached long ago without recently examining the premises. He didn't do it, Harry said. The compartment went very still. Ron said Harry, 12 muggles, were killed, Harry said. I know, I'm not arguing with the deaths, I'm questioning who caused them. He'd been thinking about this for 3 months. My parents trusted their lives to him. My parents were not people who trusted carelessly. From everything I've read about them, they were intelligent and careful. They chose Sirius Black as secret keeper. He paused. I want to understand why, if he was the kind of person who could do what they said he did, they chose him. People misjudge character, Ron started. I know, Harry said, but not my parents, not in that choice for that reason with the stakes that high. He looked at his hands. There's something wrong with the story we've been told. Hermione was very quiet beside him. He knew what it meant. She'd been thinking about the same thing and had arrived somewhere similar and was working out whether to say it. Pettigrew, she said. Yes, Harry said. He was the actual secret keeper, she said. Or you think he was? I think Sirius switched them at the last moment. A decoy secret keeper making everyone think it was Sirius while it was actually Peter Pettigrew. I think Pettigrew was the spy. I think Pettigrew faked his own death, killed the muggles to blame Sirius and has been hiding ever since. Hiding how? Neville said. As an animagus, Hermione said, and she said it with the particular certainty she had when she'd independently arrived at the same conclusion. An unregistered animagus, it's the only way to disappear completely without a trace of magic, become an animal that blends in. She paused. A rat. Ron went very still. Scabbers, Harry said. He looked at Ron. I'm sorry, but your rat is 13 years old and is missing a toe on his right front foot, and the toe was missing when he came into your family's possession 12 years ago, and the report of Pettigrew's death mentioned that all they found of him was a single finger. Ron looked at Scabbers' cage. Scabbers was sleeping or performing sleep, which Harry had been watching all summer through Ron's letters and growing increasingly certain about. I got him from Percy, Ron said. He was working through it the way Ron worked through difficult things, not fast but completely, going through each piece and finding its place. Percy got him from, he stopped. He was just there in our house, just always there. Spying, Harry said. On my family, Ron said. And now the color was going out of his face in a very particular way, not the pale of fear but the pale of a specific and personal anger. He reached out and put his hand over Scabbers' cage, not to touch the rat, just to establish a position. Right, he said very quietly. Right, we can't deal with it on the train, Hermione said, but we need to find Sirius Black before the Dementors do. Finding an escaped prisoner is, Ron started. He's innocent, Hermione said, and the directness of it coming from her settled the question of whether they were treating this as a given or a hypothesis. Until evidence suggests otherwise, we operate on Harry's premise, and Harry's premise is that his parents trusted this man with their lives and that trust was not misplaced. Ron nodded. Neville nodded. Ginny was watching Harry with the particular intensity she had of paying attention to the things people didn't say as much as the things they did. He's here, Harry said. In Scotland, the Dementors are here because he's here. He looked out the window at the October landscape rushing past. Which means he came here for a reason. For you, Hermione said. He came back for you. The compartment was quiet for a moment with the weight of that, with the specific feeling of being the thing someone had risked their freedom for, which was the most intimate kind of love Harry had ever received from a direction he'd never expected. Then we find him first, he said. The new defense against the dark arts professor arrived at the Gryffindor table the next morning in the form of a name on the timetable, R.J. Lupin. He arrived in person at the first Dada lesson looking like someone who had been through a great deal and had decided to find it instructive rather than debilitating, which Harry found immediately interesting. He was thin and tired and his robes were patched, and he had the particular quality of people who have been genuinely afraid of things and have consequently become genuinely good at managing fear. He also, Harry noticed on the first day, smelled different at the full moon. He noticed this carefully, filed it, and said nothing. What he said instead at the Boggart lesson, after watching Lupin navigate the class through it with a warmth and precision that was the best teaching he'd encountered at Hogwarts, was, Professor, a moment. Lupin looked at him after the others had filed out. He had the expression of someone who has been anticipating a specific conversation and is now gauging how close the actual version will be to the anticipated one. Your name is on the Marauders map, Harry said. A significant pause. The map is meant to be lost, Lupin said. Filch had it. I found it in his filing cabinet in October. He'd found it because the castle had led him to it, which he considered a gift. It's a remarkable piece of work. The 4 people who made it had a better understanding of Hogwarts magical architecture than most trained wizards ever achieve. Lupin was very still. How did you know 4 people made it? The magical signatures, Harry said. 4 distinct styles woven together. One of them is my father's. He paused. One is Sirius Black's. Another pause. Harry, he didn't betray them, Harry said. I know you know this. You've known it for 12 years and you haven't been able to act on it because the evidence was impossible to present without catching Peter Pettigrew first. He met Lupin's eyes steadily. I'm going to catch Peter Pettigrew. I need your help to do it. Lupin sat down. He looked at the floor for a moment, and then he looked at Harry with an expression that was composed of several things simultaneously. Relief, grief, hope, the specific pain of someone who has been carrying a wrong thing alone for a very long time. How did you? My parents trusted Sirius, Harry said. So I trusted that trust. The math of the alternative doesn't work. Pettigrew was the spy, he was the one Voldemort actually turned, and he set up Sirius to take the fall for it. Peter was. Lupin stopped. He was always the weakest of us, not unintelligent, but the most afraid of the wrong things and then afraid of Voldemort, and I think, he closed his eyes for a moment. I think the being afraid of Voldemort started before we knew to be afraid, and by the time any of us might have noticed, it was too late. He's been hiding as an animagus, Harry said. A rat. Lupin's head came up. In the Weasley family. For 12 years, Harry said. Form of a pet. He paused. His name is Scabbers. The look on Lupin's face when all the pieces connected was something Harry absorbed and stored, the particular expression of someone for whom a long mysterious pattern has suddenly, completely resolved. It wasn't triumph, it was closer to the feeling of understanding something terrible that you'd almost rather not have understood. You've told Ron, Lupin said. Yes, Ron's handling it. He's angry. He paused. He should be angry. Yes, Lupin said, he should be. He looked at Harry for a long moment. You're extraordinary, you know. People keep saying that, Harry said. What I am is prepared. Preparation requires intelligence and discipline and Professor, Harry said, where is Sirius? A long pause, then Lupin said quietly, I don't know, but I think I know how to find him. He reached into his robes. The map, if you'd let me. Harry handed it over. Lupin looked at it for a long time, the way you looked at something you'd helped build when you were a different version of yourself, and the building of it had been one of the best things you'd ever done. I solemnly swear that I am up to no good, Lupin said, and the map bloomed to life under his hands. They bent over it together, professor and student, looking for a name in the margins of the castle's living map. Sirius Black was in the Shrieking Shack. He'd been there for 3 weeks by the time Harry found him, with Hermione beside him and Lupin 2 steps behind carrying the Marauder's map and the weight of 12 years of misdirected grief. The tunnel under the Whomping Willow was damp and narrow and went on longer than it seemed to have any right to. Harry went first. Hermione had her wand up. Lupin carried the map. The shack above was in its usual deteriorated state, dust and broken furniture and the specific silence of places that have had violence in them and kept the memory. Harry moved through it with the awareness of all 3 floors, the structural integrity of the building, the presence of something alive and watching at the top. He went up the stairs. Sirius Black was in the far corner of the top room. He was not what Harry had expected, though he'd been careful not to expect too much. He was thin in a way that went beyond the physical, hollowed from inside, 12 years of Azkaban written in him the way weather wrote itself into stone. He was watching Harry with eyes that were his mother's eyes and not at all same green-grey color, but lit differently with a desperate hunger that wasn't aggression but was the closest thing to it that sustained isolation could produce. Harry, he said, his voice was rough. You look like my father, Harry said. I know, everyone says. He crouched down, putting himself at Sirius's level without making it a performance, the way he'd crouched to look at the basilisk, or the way he sat with Neville when Neville needed to feel like an equal rather than someone being helped. Are you hurt? No, Sirius said, and then more honestly, nothing that won't, I'll be all right. He was looking at Harry with the specific hunger of someone who has been in the dark for a long time. I've been watching you since September. He stopped. The Dementors, I handled the Dementors, Harry said. I saw. Something moved in Sirius's face. The stag, that's your father's, that was James's. I know, Harry said. It was his animagus form, I taught him. He stopped. I'm sorry, I should be. There's a great deal I need to say and he looked at his hands. Azkaban makes you. I know about Pettigrew, Harry said. Sirius's breath stopped. He's in the castle, Harry said, in the form of a rat. He's been hiding with the Weasley family for 12 years. He held Sirius's gaze. We're going to catch him tonight. A very long silence. Sirius looked at Harry and then past him at Hermione and then at Lupin, who had come into the room and was standing at the door with an expression that was the accumulated weight of 12 years of guilt that wasn't entirely his and wasn't entirely not. Moony, Sirius said. Padfoot, Lupin said, and his voice was something complicated and true. You knew, Sirius said, not an accusation. The observation was sadder than that. You worked it out. This year, Lupin said. I'm sorry it took. It doesn't matter, Sirius said. It doesn't, not now. He looked at Harry again. You believe me? Yes, Harry said. I've believed you since July. Something happened in Sirius's face that was the emotional equivalent of a structure that has been under enormous pressure being released, not collapsing, just releasing, a careful unwinding. His eyes went bright in a way that was distinct from the hunger of before, something warmer, something that had a future in it. Your parents, he started. There's so much I want to. Later, Harry said. Tonight we deal with Pettigrew. After, there's a great deal of time for everything after. You're very like Lily, Sirius said. She always prioritized in that order too. Now first, everything else after. I know, Harry said, and then more quietly, tell me everything about her. Later. Tell me everything about both of them. Everything, Sirius said. Every single thing I remember. It was a promise and a reunion and the beginning of something all at once. Hermione said from behind Harry, Pettigrew. Ron has him under stasis charm in a covered cage in the dormitory. We need to get back before the full moon. She said it to the room, and Lupin went slightly still at full moon in the way of someone who knows exactly what they're being reminded of, and Harry watched him absorb it, the precision of Hermione's timing, the acknowledgement without judgment, and Lupin straightened. Tonight, then, Lupin said. They caught Pettigrew with the Marauder's map, and a stasis charm Hermione had been practicing for 3 weeks, and Ron providing the specific knowledge of which cage, and how the lock worked. All of it moving with the coordinated efficiency of people who had planned this rather than stumbled into it. Pettigrew, back in human form under the pressure of Lupin's transformation of him, backed into the corner of the dormitory at 2 in the morning, was smaller than Harry had expected and more ordinary-looking, which he'd been told to expect and still found startling. Evil was always more ordinary-looking than you wanted. He screamed when Harry looked at him, actually screamed, a thin sound of recognition and terror. 12 years, Sirius said from the door. His voice was very controlled. You let me rot for 12 years. Sirius, I had no, don't, Sirius said. Pettigrew looked at Harry with the eyes of something cornered. He would have killed me, he said. He would have, yes, Harry said. And you chose to let my parents die instead of yourself. He said it simply, without the anger that the words deserved, because the anger was less useful than the clarity. That's who you are, that's what you chose. Pettigrew's face crumpled. Potter, bind him, Harry said to Hermione, and Hermione did with a rope-binding charm she'd been practicing along with the stasis, and Pettigrew's wrists came together and he stopped talking because there was nothing to say that would change anything. Sirius looked at the bound man on the floor with the expression of someone who had spent 12 years imagining this moment and found the reality of it both less satisfying and more final than the imagination. He looked at Harry. What happens now? He said. Now we go to Dumbledore, Harry said. Tonight, with Pettigrew and the evidence. He paused. You're getting out of this, Sirius. Tonight you're getting out. Sirius looked at him for a long moment with his mother's eyes and his father's cheekbones and 12 years of Azkaban behind him and a future he hadn't been able to let himself believe in until now beginning to become real. I have a house in London, he said. It's terrible, but it's mine. I know about the house, Harry said. Grimmauld Place, how do you? I've been researching my family since I was old enough to do research, Harry said, which was approximately age 7. He paused. When you're free, officially free, I'd like to see it. When you're free, Sirius said, would you? He stopped. I'm your godfather. I don't know how much that means at this point or what you'd. Everything, Harry said. That means everything. Sirius looked at him, and the structure that had been held under pressure for 12 years released a little more. And the warmth that came up in his face was the warmth of someone who has just been given back something they had stopped permitting themselves to want. Hermione stood up from the floor where Pettigrew was bound and looked at Harry, and he saw her make the note in her expression that meant she'd observed something she'd remember. The specific note she made when she was watching him with people who needed him. Dumbledore, she said. Dumbledore, he agreed. Pettigrew was in ministry custody by midnight. Dumbledore had moved with a dispatch that Harry suspected had been partially prepared for, not specifically for this night, but in the general sense of someone who kept several exigency protocols current. He'd flued the head of magical law enforcement directly, had required a senior aura presence within the hour, and had stood in his office and watched Pettigrew confess with the expression of someone watching a mistake that has lasted 12 years finally correct itself. Sirius Black was formally exonerated at 2 in the morning, not in a proper setting with full ceremony, but in the provisional and exhausted way that real things happened. A ministry official arriving with paperwork at Dumbledore's fire, documents signed, the legal status changed. Sirius sat in a chair in Dumbledore's office and held the document and looked at it with an expression that Harry would carry with him for the rest of his life, the expression of someone reading their own name in a language they'd forgotten spoke about them. This is, Sirius said. He stopped. 12 years, Dumbledore said quietly. I am sorry, Sirius, I should have looked harder. I should have questioned the conviction earlier. There is no adequate accounting for the oversight, and I won't pretend to offer one. Sirius looked at him for a long time. The dynamics of that look were complex, the residue of the wrongness that had happened, the specific shapes of blame, the understanding that fault was distributed rather than singular. You couldn't have known what you didn't look for, he said finally. None of us thought to look, that's the point. He looked at Harry. Except you. I was working from a different starting point, Harry said. Your parents' judgment, Sirius said. Yes, Sirius was quiet for a moment. Then he said, they were right, you know, James and Lily. They were always right about people, both of them. They chose each other correctly. They chose Dumbledore correctly. They chose me. He stopped. They chose you correctly too, what you are. He struggled for words in a way that suggested 12 years of not having anyone to talk to had left him slightly rusty with the having of feelings. They'd have been right about you, whatever that's worth. Everything, Harry said. That's worth everything. The year moved on because years did that. Lupin taught defense with the specificity and honesty of someone who understood the subject from the inside, and Harry and Hermione absorbed everything he offered and added it to the accumulating architecture of what they were building. The Patronus became a regular workshop, Tuesday evenings, the unused classroom on the third floor with a growing number of Gryffindors finding their way in, and Lupin looking on with the expression of someone watching exactly what needed to happen. Sirius wrote. Long letters full of James and Lily and the years before, told with the warm chaos of someone who'd been bottling stories for 12 years and now had somewhere to put them. Harry read each one twice, once for the information, once for the feeling of it, the warmth of being known through the people who'd loved him before he had words. He shared them with Hermione because she'd asked once and he'd said yes without hesitating. She read them with the expression she had when she was trying to be analytical about something that was making her feel things, which meant she read them carefully and then set them down and looked at the window for a while and didn't say much. He loves you, she said once, after a particularly long letter about the day James and Lily were married, with Sirius as best man and Pettigrew in the crowd and everyone 22 and young enough to be reckless about the future. Yes, Harry said. It's a lot, she said, receiving that. He looked at her. You're not used to it either, he said. My parents love me, she said quickly. I know, he said. I meant the specific kind, someone choosing you not because you share blood or because you're impressive, but because, he paused, because you're you. She was quiet for a long time. No, she said, I'm not very used to that. I know, he said. She looked at him. There was something in her face that was being carefully managed, and he didn't push it, because some things needed to be arrived at in their own time, and pushing the arrival only changed the quality of the thing. He just stayed where he was, which was beside her, which was where he was most of the time now, and eventually she went back to her book, and the fire moved, and the letters from Sirius sat on the table between them. The Triwizard Tournament announcement at the start of fourth year arrived during what was still the most extraordinary feast Harry had seen at Hogwarts, which was saying something. Dumbledore stood at the high table and explained the tournament, the 3 tasks, the 3 schools, the eternal glory, the goblet of fire that would select one champion from each school, and Harry sat at the Gryffindor table and felt the Founders' magic respond to the word tournament with the specific quality it had for things that were relevant but wrong. He leaned to Hermione. Does this feel right to you? She was watching Dumbledore with the expression she had when she was reading a situation at 3 levels simultaneously. The goblet of fire, she said quietly. It's an impartial magical judge, hundreds of years old, designed to select the most worthy champion. She paused, which means if someone can subvert it, they can get anyone into the tournament, he said, regardless of age, regardless of whether the person entered themselves. He watched the goblet at the front of the hall, blue-white flame and old magic, and the contract the tournament creates is binding, magically enforced. If you're entered against your will, she said, and her voice was very careful, and the contract is binding regardless. It's a trap, Harry said. The tournament is a trap, or it can be made into one. For you specifically, she said. For a person connected to Voldemort specifically, he said. A person whose blood he'd want. He was very still, working through it. He's been building toward restoration. We destroyed the diary Horcrux. He'll have found other vessels, other approaches. He needs a body, he needs a ritual. The ritual would require specific ingredients, she said immediately, because they'd been through this. They'd discussed the Horcrux problem in layers for 2 years, and the ritual of restoration was one of the threads. Blood of the enemy specifically. Taken under compulsion or, at the end of a tournament task, Harry said, in a graveyard. He had a sudden clear image of it that wasn't a vision, just a logical progression made vivid by the certainty of it. It ends in a graveyard. She looked at him. You're sure, aren't you? A pause. Yes, she said. They looked at each other across the dinner noise and the excitement of the hall around them, where students were already discussing the tournament with the enthusiasm of people who didn't know what it was going to become. Then we control how we enter, he said. We control what we know going in. We don't let the cup determine the terms. The cup will still select a champion, she said. If someone has subverted it to enter you, then I get entered, Harry said, and I compete on my terms. He paused. And you're there. I'm not going to be entered, she said. No, he agreed, which means you have freedom of movement I won't have. While I'm in the tasks, you can work on the thing behind the tasks. She absorbed this. You want to use the tournament. I want to use the tournament to draw out whoever's running Voldemort's restoration strategy, he said. They're watching the tournament. They have a piece in the tournament. If we play it correctly, we turn the trap around, she said. Yes, Hermione looked at the goblet, looked at the high table where Dumbledore was accepting a delegation from Beauxbatons with the ceremony of someone conducting ancient ritual, and the other new face at the table, Alastor Moody, paranoid and scarred and not quite right in a way Harry had already catalogued. Moody, she said, new this year, specifically this year. Yes, Harry said, I noticed. She was reading him from 50 feet. Something's wrong with his eye, not the magical eye itself, the way it moves, it's not tracking the way it should. Real Moody has seen combat, Harry said. Real Moody moves like someone who has been in danger for 40 years and trusts nothing. This one moves like someone performing caution. He paused. Polyjuice potion. Possibly, she said. It would explain the eye. Who? Someone close enough to Voldemort's inner circle to have a plan this complex, she said, and patient enough to sustain a sustained impersonation. She thought about it. Bartemius Crouch Jr., she said. He was in Azkaban for being a Death Eater, supposedly died in prison, but with Pettigrew having successfully hidden for 12 years, the possibility of a misreported death in Azkaban isn't trivial, Harry said. She stared at him. That is an enormous logical leap. Is it wrong? A pause. I don't know yet, she said, but I don't think it's wrong. They looked at each other. I'm going to get selected, Harry said. We should be ready for it. We're always ready, she said, which was the most Hermione thing she'd ever said, and he smiled at her with the specific smile that was only for her, the real one, and she looked back at him steadily. The goblet of fire spat out 3 slips of parchment and then a 4th, Harry Potter. The hall went silent in the specific way of mass surprise before it became mass noise. Harry stood up from the Gryffindor table without being told to, which was what you did when your name was called, and he walked to the front of the hall with the calm of someone who had been expecting exactly this and had spent 2 months preparing for it. He passed the goblet and felt its magic, old and subverted, a foreign intention woven through its original purpose the way you'd weave a trap into a path. He felt the contract settle over him like something closing, binding, and he acknowledged it the way you acknowledged the rules of a game you decided to win. In the antechamber, the champions were waiting, Cedric Diggory, broad and honest-faced and looking at Harry with surprise rather than hostility, Fleur de Lacquer watching the door with the self-possession of someone who is never the least powerful person in a room and knows it, Victor Crumb silent and observant in the way of the genuinely dangerous. Harry looked at all 3 of them and thought, these are not my enemies. I didn't enter myself, he said to the room, because they deserved the straightforwardness. Someone else entered me against my will. I don't know yet exactly who. I have theories, but I'm in this tournament now and I intend to see it through. Fleur looked at him. You are 14. Yes, you are not afraid, she said, and it was less a challenge than an observation. Not of the tournament, he said. She looked at him carefully, really looked, with the assessing intelligence of someone who had been looked at so much for the wrong things that she'd developed an excellent eye for the right ones. You know more about this than you're saying, she said. I know some things, he said. I don't know everything yet. He paused. The tournament is going to get complicated, not in the way they're telling us, in a different way. He looked at all 3 of them. I don't know yet what I'll be able to share, but he held Fleur's gaze and then Cedric's and then Crumb's. The people in this room are not each other's enemies. We should probably keep that in mind. Cedric Diggory looked at him with the expression of someone who has just rapidly revised an assumption. You know something's wrong with the tournament, he said, not a question. Yes, Harry said, and you're still competing. Competing gives me access, Harry said, access I need. Dumbledore arrived in the antechamber at that point, with Ludo Bagman and Cornelius Fudge and Bartemius Crouch Sr., and the official business of the tournament's complication began, and Harry stood through it with the patience of someone who knows the conversation in the room isn't the real conversation. He watched Moody watching him from the corner. He met the magical eye which swiveled to track him in the way that confirmed everything, a familiar wrong-learned behavior, the performing of Moody's habits by someone who had studied them from a distance. He smiled at Moody pleasantly. Moody's single real eye narrowed. Harry looked away. He told Hermione everything that night in the corridor outside the trophy room where they'd taken to having the conversations that needed space and privacy, which was most of them. She listened, thought. Said Crouch Jr. is confirmed. How? I went through Moody's class notes from his first week, she said. The defense theory he's been teaching doesn't match Moody's documented teaching style from his previous post. I found the records in the library. The real Moody was practical first. This one front-loads theory. Someone memorized what Moody was but didn't account for how he actually taught. You've been investigating since September, Harry said. Since August, she said. I had the summer. She paused. The Polyjuice maintenance is complex. He's either making it himself or being supplied. Given that he's impersonating a ministry figure, being supplied requires an inside ministry contact or a reliable independent source. The most likely source given the timeline is someone at the school, Harry said. Or someone with access to the school, she said. The ingredients were taken from Snape's personal stores in September. Snape mentioned it in potions, just a comment, not an accusation, but I noted it. She folded her arms. He's been reporting to Voldemort. Crouch is maintaining the impersonation with materials accessed through the castle, which means Voldemort has a foothold inside Hogwarts, Harry said. Again, different this time, she said. More sophisticated, longer horizon. The graveyard, he said. The third task, she said. Something in the third task is the delivery mechanism. A portkey, probably something that looks like part of the task and is actually the exit. She paused. We need to know what the third task is before it happens. Find the portkey, disable it or replace it, and then let Crouch think it worked, Harry said. Let Voldemort think the ritual has a chance of happening and then be there. She looked at him. With me. With you, he said. A graveyard with Voldemort in it, she said. Not a fragment, not a shade. If the ritual proceeds, it won't proceed, he said. but we need to be there because the graveyard is where he's vulnerable. He'll have committed to the ritual, he'll have exposed himself, and the Horcruxes are down to, he thought. We found the diary. Dumbledore believes he's identified the ring and the locket. If we neutralize the ritual and force him back to shade form, the remaining Horcruxes can be systematically dealt with, she said. And each time one goes, he gets weaker. Less anchored, she was quiet for a moment. How many of the Horcruxes are destroyed now? 2 definitively, he said. The diary, the ring. Dumbledore managed that in August, though at a cost. His hand. He paused. I think one is in me. She went very still. The night in Godric's Hollow, he said. The killing curse rebounded, but Horcruxes are made during the act of murder. That night the curse hit me and it should have killed me, and instead it fragmented Voldemort. Some of that fragmentation went into you, she said. Her voice was very controlled. A piece of his soul in you. I think so, he said. I've been feeling around the edges of it for a year. It's not, he searched for the right words. It's not part of me, it's not integrated. It's a passenger like Quirrell was a passenger. A very small, very damaged fragment that's been in a body full of Founders magic for 13 years and has consequently been, he paused, diminished. Whatever it was when it arrived, it's barely anything now. She was looking at him with the expression of someone who is absorbing information that is simultaneously logical and terrible. Does Dumbledore know? She said. He suspects, Harry said. He hasn't said it directly, but some of the things he said, the way he looks at me sometimes, he paused. He was building a plan around it, a sacrifice. Hermione's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did, a specific cold sharpening that he'd learned to recognize as the place she went when she was very angry and was not going to let the anger stop her thinking. He was going to let you die, she said, as part of the plan, as the only way to destroy that fragment, he said. If you can't remove a Horcrux from a living host, then the host has to stop being living, she said. That's what he concluded. Yes. And he didn't tell you? No, a silence. Outside the trophy room corridor, the castle was moving through its late-night rhythms, a prefect at the far end of the hall, a suit of armor completing its patrol, torches burning low. He might be wrong, she said. Yes, he agreed. The Founder's magic has been in you for 13 years, she said, and her voice was the voice she had when she was building something real-time theory assembling itself into architecture. It's been reshaping the magical environment inside you for your entire life. A Horcrux that went in before that magic established itself, that has been surrounded by and subject to the Founder's combined influence for 13 years. She paused. Slytherin made Horcruxes. He understood the mechanism from the inside. His bequest might include the capacity to separate it, Harry said. Without killing you, she said. That's a significant claim, he said. I know, she said. I'm not certain, but I know the alternative is a plan built on the assumption that you have to die, and I'm not accepting that assumption until I've exhausted every other possibility. She said it with the absolute finality of someone who has made a decision at a deep level. We're going to find another way. He looked at her. In the low torchlight of the corridor, her face was both very familiar and more serious than he'd seen it outside of actual danger, and the Founder's magic in both of them was moving in the 4-part pattern, steady and warm, all of it fully present. Okay, he said. That's all you're going to say, she said. You're the best researcher I've ever met and you've decided this is the problem, he said. If there's another way, you'll find it. And if you say you're going to find it, I'll find it, she said, and it came out fierce. I know, he said. She looked at him for a moment with something in her face that was moving toward a border and then stepped back from it deliberately, the way she did with the things that needed their own time. The graveyard, she said. We need a plan for the graveyard. We need to be there together, he said, both of us through the portkey. If we're both holding the portkey when it activates, we both go, he said. And then Voldemort gets 2 people instead of 1, and 2 people who know exactly what he's trying to do and have spent 2 years preparing for this specific moment. She was very still for a moment, weighing everything. All right, she said. All right. If we go prepared for the worst version of the scenario, she said. Which means I need to know the ritual's mechanism in detail. We need counterspells for the specific magic. And 2 months, he said. We have 2 months before the 3rd task. I've been preparing for longer than 2 months, she said. I know, he said. I started, she said, the summer after 1st year. He looked at her. Before we knew this was coming. Before we knew the specifics, she said. But the shape of it, that Voldemort would come back in a real body and we'd have to be there for it, that's been clear since the mirror room. She paused. I've been preparing for the night we'd have to actually fight him. So have I, he said. They stood in the corridor and looked at each other, and the Founder's magic was steady and present and four-voiced and very, very old, carrying in it everything that Godric and Helga and Rowena and Salazar had ever known about the shape of war. Together, she said. Together, he said. The night of the 3rd task, the maze was alive. Harry went in at the front, selected by tournament rules, with the Founder's magic fully awake in him. The maze's enchantments, hexes, creatures, confounding magic moved against him like weather, like something that had been designed for a person without his particular perceptions and was consequently slightly wrong in its targeting. He moved through it the way water moved through obstacles, following the path of least resistance and creating his own where there wasn't one. Hermione was behind him. She had not been entered. She should not have been inside the maze. She was inside the maze because at the moment the cannon fired and the champions entered, She had been standing at the maze entrance with her hand on Harry's arm and the look of someone who had made a completely final decision, and the maze's entrance enchantment had let her through. The castle, Harry had said, looking back at her in the maze's first turn. The castle, she'd confirmed. They moved through the maze together, and what the maze threw at them they dealt with in sequence, efficiently, the Founders' magic making them something other than two students at a tournament, something older and more certain, two halves of something that had been planned for 1,000 years. The cup was at the center. The portkey was built into its base. She'd identified it from 20 feet, the specific magical signature of a charged transport object disguised as decorative metalwork. They looked at it. Together, she said. Together, he said. They took the cup. The graveyard was cold. Voldemort's resurrection was supposed to be unstoppable. The ritual had been in motion from the moment they arrived. Pettigrew, restored to the Death Eater service that Harry and Hermione had apparently not fully accounted for in their intelligence work, had the cauldron ready, the ingredients prepared, the bone dust rising in the moonlit dark of a graveyard that smelled of old stone and crushed grass and magic, worked against its own nature. What wasn't supposed to be there was Hermione, who had arrived with Harry, and who spent the 40 seconds of the ritual's initial phase doing something very precise and very quiet with her wand at the base of the cauldron's magical field. The ritual completed, Voldemort rose. He was real, fully embodied, white and cold, and more himself than anything that had worn his name before. He stood in the graveyard in his new body and breathed the night air and turned to where Harry was standing, and his face, which was not quite a face, which was closer to a diagram of a face drawn by someone who understood the geometry but not the warmth, moved into something that might have been satisfaction. And then he saw Hermione. "You," he said, not to Harry, to her. And the quality of you was the same quality as in the mirror room when he'd looked at Harry and said, "What are you?" The recognition of something outside the model, something unaccounted for. "Hello," Hermione said. "The other one," Voldemort said slowly. "The one from—" He stopped, his red eyes moving between them. "Both of them. They sent both of them." And that they was the Founders, and hearing Voldemort acknowledge the Founders was a strange and grounding thing because it meant he knew, had always known, that what he was facing was larger than a boy. "The ritual is compromised," Harry said. Voldemort looked at him. "She modified the cauldron's field during the incantation," Harry said. "The body you're in will last." "Hermione, what's your estimate?" 4 to 6 hours, she said, "before the structural instability becomes significant. The ritual needs to complete cleanly to produce a permanent body. The modification I introduced creates a slow degradation in the magical binding." She paused. "I could be wrong. I haven't had a chance to test this specific scenario." Voldemort looked at her. "You modified the ritual of my restoration," he said, and the quality of his voice was not the rage Harry had expected. Something colder, more considered. Something that was almost respect in the way a chess player respected an opponent who had just done something unexpected. "Yes," she said. "During the incantation itself," he said. "Yes," she said. A silence in the graveyard. Wind moved through the long grass. The Death Eaters who had gathered, summoned by the dark mark present at the edges of the space, were very still. "How?" Voldemort said simply. "Rowena Ravenclaw," Hermione said. "The ability to see magical structure as architecture. I could see what the ritual was building and introduce a flaw in the foundation." She paused. "I've been studying your restoration ritual for 2 years." Voldemort looked at them both. At the boy who stood without fear in a graveyard with a Dark Lord and a ring of Death Eaters, and at the girl beside him who had just calmly explained that she'd modified a ritual designed by some of the most powerful dark magic in the modern world. "Fascinating," he said. And it was genuine. The one thing Tom Riddle had never been able to fully suppress was his genuine intellectual fascination with things he didn't understand. "We're going to fight now," Harry said. "That's what this ends in. I want you to know we've destroyed 2 of your Horcruxes. We know what the others are. The body you're in is degrading, and we're standing in a graveyard surrounded by your followers, and none of that changes the outcome." "You cannot kill me," Voldemort said. "I am not immortal," Harry said. "Not anymore. You made yourself into pieces, and we've been removing the pieces, and what's left of you is less every time." He raised his wand. "This is the first time you're fighting someone who isn't afraid of you. Notice that. Understand what it means." "It means you're young and arrogant," Voldemort said. "It means you've built your entire power structure on fear," Harry said, "and the people in front of you aren't afraid, so you have nothing." Voldemort looked at him for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "I remember what I was before, what I wanted." He said it with the quality of someone making an observation rather than a confession. "Survival, simply survival, a world that had discarded me." "I know," Harry said. Voldemort's eyes moved to him, sharp, searching. "You don't." "I grew up in a cupboard," Harry said. "I know what it feels like to be told the world wasn't made for you." He held Voldemort's gaze with the directness that had always been his. "The difference is what you chose to do about it." A long silence. "Kill him," Voldemort said to the Death Eaters, and the spell fire started. It was not a clean fight. It was not a glorious fight. It was a graveyard in the dark with unforgivables moving through the air like colored lightning, and Harry and Hermione standing back to back, and the Founders' magic fully awake in both of them in a way it had never been before, not individual, not parallel, but genuinely combined. the four-part harmony resolving into something singular that was all four of them, and neither of them specifically and old and enormous and entirely present. Shield charms went up without incantation. Curses were redirected, repurposed, returned with interest. Harry moved through the Death Eaters with the battle instinct of Godric Gryffindor, and Hermione was the architecture behind him, the strategy, the structural thinking that predicted where the next threat was before it arrived. They didn't speak. They'd stopped needing to. Voldemort watched, and what was on his face through all of it, through the fight and the deaths and the chaos, was not anger. It was the expression of someone watching something they've suspected was true being confirmed in a way they cannot deny. He raised his wand at Harry. Harry raised his. The wands met in priori incantatum, the echo of shared cause singing in the night air, and for a moment they were connected, two people tied by prophecy and death and 1,000 years of magic that had never intended this and had produced it anyway. "I don't want to kill you," Harry said into the connection. "I know," Voldemort said. "And then that is why you will win." He severed the connection. He looked at Hermione, one long last moment of assessment. He turned, he left. Pettigrew left with him, a portkey to somewhere, the Death Eaters scattering into disapparition, the graveyard emptying in the space of 30 seconds into silence and grass and cold air, and the distant sound of the tournament's crowd waiting for champions who weren't coming. Harry and Hermione stood in the graveyard in the sudden quiet. "He left," she said. "He needs to stabilize the body," Harry said. "He's buying time." 4 to 6 hours, she said. "More than enough for tonight." He turned to look at her. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said. No." He looked at her properly, at her face in the graveyard moonlight, at the Founders' magic settling back down in both of them, cooling from the combat heat. "You modified his ritual," he said. "I'd been working on it since 3rd year," she said. "You never told me." "I wasn't certain it would work," she said. I didn't want to promise something I couldn't deliver." She paused. "I should have told you." "You should have," he said. "Yes," a pause. "I'm sorry." "Next time," he said. "There won't be a next time where I do something like that without telling you," she said. "I promise." He looked at her for a long moment. "He knew you," he said. "Voldemort, he called you the other one, he knew about you." "Has been paying attention since the mirror room," she said. "He would have, yes, he would have researched." "He was afraid of you," Harry said. She started to say something dismissive and stopped because it was true and she knew it was true. "He was more afraid of you," she said. "No," Harry said. "He's faced me before, he knows the shape of what I am, but you," he paused. "You modified a ritual during the incantation. He'd never had someone do that to him before." She was quiet. "The new thing scares him more than the known thing," Harry said. "Keep being new." She looked at him, and the thing that had been moving toward a border for 2 years was very close to it now. The graveyard was empty and cold, and the moon was moving behind a cloud, and they had just fought Lord Voldemort and won the first round of a war that was going to be long and difficult and real. "Harry," she said. "I know," he said quietly. She stopped, started again. "When I thought during the ritual, when there was a moment I wasn't sure the modification would hold." "I know," he said. "I thought about the table in the mirror," she said. "The one you saw." He looked at her steadily. "I want that," she said. "Whatever that is, I want that to be real." "It will be," he said. "It's going to take a while and there's a war in the way," but he held her gaze. "It will be." She nodded once. She turned toward the portkey. "We need to get back." "We do," he agreed. They took the portkey together, and the graveyard went, and Hogwarts came back around them in a rush of noise and light, and the enormous relieved chaos of a crowd that had been waiting too long, and Dumbledore was there, and Sirius was there. He'd come to watch legally free, and McGonagall was there, and all of them looked at Harry and Hermione arriving together with the expression of people who need to ask questions and are choosing to wait the 3 seconds for the adrenaline to settle first. Harry looked at Sirius. Sirius looked back at him with his godfather's eyes, with 12 years of Azkaban and 3 months of freedom and the specific terror of having watched from the stands. "Well," Sirius said, "he got away," Harry said, "for now. And we know where he's going," Hermione said, "and what he needs and how to stop him." Sirius looked at them both. Then he looked at Dumbledore. "You see what they are," he said. "Do you finally see what they are?" "Yes," Dumbledore said, and his voice was very quiet. "I do." Above them, Hogwarts was lit in every window, and the Founders' magic moved through the stone of it like a tide, and the war was beginning in earnest, and 5 people stood on the grounds in the night air, and none of them were afraid.